Hello everyone, if you don't already know who I am Ivy the Occultist on YouTube and Instagram, and today is a super special video because it's my 1-year anniversary on YouTube. So I had posted on my community page asking if there were any questions regarding your magical practice, if you wanted advice on a particular situation, or if you were curious about my certain experiences or opinions with certain things. So there were a lot of questions. There were so many questions, and some of them were really complicated, which I was just explaining this to my channel members that I get really excited when somebody asks me a complicated question. It's like I get an extra boost of dopamine. I'm like, yeah, okay, let's do it. Let's get into it. Let's talk about the nuances. So we've got a lot of questions going into this Q&A today for the 1-year anniversary special, I guess is what I'm calling this. And the questions are all over the board too. So I've got timestamps on this video. I tried to group all of these questions together in as many categories as possible to kind of organize this for you. That way, if something is boring to you, feel free to skip it, or if there's a particular topic that interests you the most, go ahead and skip there. I have a miscellaneous section that's really just random, and I have a feeling that this video is probably going to take me all day to film, so I've got my snacks, I've got my tea. Feel free to get cozy, get your own snacks and tea or whatever you like to drink. Side note, I really love these little straws. Hopefully you can see this okay, but they're called yerba mate straws. Highly recommend them, but it's got a little stir spoon at the end with the strainer right there, and then of course the little straw. But that way you can dump your loose leaf tea just straight into the hot water and you can sip it out, and it strains all the like gunk and the chunks and stuff. So if you have loose leaf tea, definitely recommend getting one of these yerba mate straws. I think you can get them pretty much anywhere, but my friend got me this for Christmas, so thank you, Molly. Side note, using the straw today. But yeah, let's just get into it. I think I'm gonna start with the easy questions, not all the easy questions, but I think I'm gonna start with some easy questions just to kind of ease myself into this. And then we'll get to more complex questions as this goes along, because I need to power up my brain first. So let's start with some easy ones. Okay, so we're gonna start with the first category, which is all about YouTube and being a YouTube content creator, I guess. I don't know a better way to say that. I don't like the term YouTube content creator, but I don't really feel like there's a better term. I don't like YouTuber either. I don't know. Okay, first question is from Peckish Pagan. The first question is, what spell did you use to help your channel become successful? So I did a lot of spell work in my first year of being on YouTube. And by the way, I have so much further to go. Like, I do not feel like I have reached peak success by any means. I feel like I did a really good job for my first year on YouTube, but there's still a lot more growth that I would like to see. But as far as getting that growth in the first year, I would say manifestation boxes and money bowls were my top two. And I just did a video on manifestation boxes where I put my YouTube goals in there for this next year, among other goals. Money bowls, I also like to put in, because YouTube is kind of like a side income for me now. I really don't make that much on YouTube yet, but it is considered somewhat of a side income. So I like to put my goals for my YouTube channel into my money bowl as well. But beyond that, for me personally, I am very much an introvert, and surprisingly enough, I suppose, I am really awkward, and it's really hard for me to talk to people in real life. Like when I'm talking to a camera, it's totally fine. I have no problems with that. But the moment I get in front of a person, I stutter a lot. I really struggle to get my words out, and it's frustrating to me because I have all these thoughts in my head and I sound brilliant inside my mind, and then it's like disconnect. There's a disconnect when I'm trying to talk to people. So what I've really been trying to do is do spell work centered around my confidence, because I've found that confidence really is key when delivering these messages, because you can have all the thoughts and ideas in your brain, but if you're not confident to actually bring it out of your mouth and out into fruition, it's just going to stay in your brain and no one else is going to see it. So I did do a lot of workings centered around confidence, and this looked like meditations and visualizations. What I like to do is I envision working with the lion. So I really like working with the lion spirit animal for my confidence. I've been working with crystal grids. And when I work with crystals on crystal grids, I usually like to work with like carnelian or tiger's eye is really good for increasing confidence. But I have found that doing workings more centered around me and my own shadows was really helpful in making my YouTube successful. Surprisingly, you would think that doing actual spells on your YouTube channel would be more successful, but for me, it was really doing those spells on my confidence levels and making me feel good when I'm making videos. You can do candle spells for confidence, or it doesn't even have to be confidence related. It can just be good communication, you know, centered around saying the right things or saying things how you want them to come out. And so for that, I would use a blue candle. Obviously, most of us know blue is great for the color of communication, the mind, the intellect. So incorporating blues into your spell work can be really helpful. But I've definitely done some candle spells. You can even take your bio picture. So if you have a picture that you can print out that's your profile picture on YouTube. I did this one time where I printed out my profile picture and then I used that. I put it on my desk, I put a blue candle on top, and then I did some sort of good communication working around the profile picture for this YouTube channel. So that's another way that you can kind of like bind it to your YouTube channel in particular. But by the way, for anybody who's watching, I think Peckish Pagan is just starting their YouTube channel, so definitely go check them out. The next question is from Chris, and Chris asks, how has becoming a YouTuber impacted your life? What are the best moments, worst moments, surprises, etc.? What would you tell yourself a year ago if you went back in time? It is so weird for me to even think about these questions or even answer these questions because I don't feel like a content creator. I really don't. Like, I know I'm making content, I'm putting it on YouTube, I'm doing all those things. Technically, I'm a YouTube content creator, but to me, that title holds so much prestige and I just don't feel that way at all about myself. I'm just me, so I don't know, it's really hard for me to answer these questions. I'm just a small YouTuber in a random corner of the internet talking about weird shit. But okay, the first question, how has becoming a YouTuber impacted your life? Best moments, worst moments, surprises, etc. I didn't realize that YouTube was going to become such a massive part of my life because it's not just editing videos or filming videos, uploading videos, responding to comments, thinking of new topics, writing scripts. I mean, that's a whole beast in itself, but it's also just networking in general, getting to know other YouTubers and being part of different Discord servers to meet people and doing collaborations. And I've met so many YouTubers that I never thought that I would ever meet in my life because I would watch their videos on YouTube and be like, wow, it would be great one day to be their friend. And then now I am their friend, which is crazy to think about. So that's one thing I definitely, I would say is a good moment or a surprise or something, is all the people that I've met along the way that I really thought that I would never get a chance to be friends with. So that's been really cool. Worst moments, I automatically want to say the people leaving negative comments, but actually that's something that really hasn't impacted me as much as I thought it would. I was really nervous when I started this YouTube channel, thinking that the negative comments were going to be the worst part and that I wouldn't be able to handle it. And actually they really haven't phased me at all. I'm very surprised with myself and proud of myself. I think the worst part is just dealing with the YouTube algorithm. It's really frustrating. I have learned a lot about the algorithm in the past year, and I kind of know some tips and tricks of what's going to do well, what doesn't. When I post a video, I do have a general sense of how it's going to perform. I know which videos are going to do better than other videos, and there are certain videos that I upload that I know will not perform well according to the YouTube algorithm, but I post it for myself because it's something that I still want to do. So it's kind of like this weird thing where you want to placate to the algorithm a little bit because you want to get your channel out there, you want people to be seeing your stuff, but at the same time, it's like I also don't want to be a sellout because I still want to do the content that I want to do that maybe not everyone else is interested in. So it's kind of like I've had to learn how to balance what I want and what I do for the algorithm. And it's kind of like a 60-40 rule, I'd say, or maybe even a 70-30, where I'm really kind of placating to the algorithm as best as I possibly can right now, since my channel is so small and I'm really trying to grow it. But I'm still doing that 40% or 30% of things I personally really want to do because it makes this whole thing meaningful. Otherwise, what's the point? What's the point of me doing this YouTube channel if I can't talk about topics that I want to talk about? So I think that's been the most frustrating part about doing this whole YouTube thing, is just placating to the algorithm, figuring out what works and what doesn't. And I see it happen to all different creators. I'm in a Discord for content creators, and this is something that we've talked about quite a bit. We really struggle to find that right balance. And as far as the next question, which is what would you tell yourself a year ago if you went back in time? I would tell myself that the negative comments really aren't something it's not as bad as I thought it was going to be. I mean, just to kind of reiterate, I really was nervous starting this YouTube channel because I am kind of a sensitive person and it's really hard to read negative comments about yourself. And also, if you decide to put yourself online, prepare for every little thing that you say and do to be criticized and analyzed. That's just how it's going to be. I can say one thing with 1,000,000 disclaimers on it in a YouTube video and I will still get comments over analyzing what I said or stripping it apart, turning it into something that it's not. There is always going to be that type of interaction, unfortunately. And so you really just kind of have to let that go and not let it get to you. But again, it really hasn't gotten to me as much as I thought it would. So that's great. Next question is from Brandon. Brandon says, as a content creator, could you give some insight on why it's so uncommon to find people openly talking about baneful magic on YouTube? I can find info on binding and banishing, but curses and malevolent intent are much harder to come by. So I think this comes down to two reasons, at least from my perspective as a content creator. The first reason is that anything that's considered dark magic or black magic or malevolent or with the intent to harm others is going to be demonetized by YouTube. So not only, even if people are uploading videos like that, it's gonna be harder to find because of the YouTube algorithm, but also that kind of pushes YouTubers to not want to make that type of content because they don't want their content demonetized by YouTube. It's really frustrating. And the second reason I think for this is, at least in my perspective, I don't particularly like doing baneful magic on a video because I don't want it to get in the wrong hands. Yes, I am very pro baneful magic in the right circumstance, when all of the mundane options have been exhausted and when somebody's using it for self-defense or it's very necessary for the situation itself. So if I'm showing somebody how to do that, how to curse or how to hex or how to whatever, and I'm putting it up on my YouTube channel, I don't get to choose who sees that video. If somebody's using it just because they got mad at somebody for something really small and mundane, I can't stop them from watching my video and then hexing someone else. And so I think that also turns off YouTubers, especially YouTubers like me, where I consider myself a pretty morally gray person, you know? I can see all sides of a situation. I'm very pro light magic and pro baneful magic. I don't like using those terms as if they're like polar opposites because that's a whole conundrum in itself. So please don't analyze too deep into that phrasing that I just used. But yeah, I just really don't want to be showing anybody how to do that type of work. And actually, now that I'm sitting here thinking about it, I think the third reason why is because it is very complicated. It's hard to get right. And there's so many opportunities for it to backfire. And that ultimately comes back on the YouTuber. And I don't think anybody wants to have any sort of liability for that. So let's say I do post a hex or a curse on YouTube or whatever. Somebody watches it and then they perform that hex or curse and maybe they did it wrong. Maybe they didn't, you know, whatever, insert whatever reasoning here. They have the potential to come after the YouTuber, the YouTube content creator, and say, well, this didn't work, it backfired, it's all your fault, why did you post this? I'm gonna hex you now because you gave me a hex that backfired on me and it's all your fault, essentially. And I don't think any YouTuber really wants that liability. That's actually one of the reasons why I don't post more complicated spells on YouTube, because it's so complicated and you have to have so much backstory in order to even do those types of spells in the first place, that I don't want a beginner or an intermediate or something stumbling into that spell, doing it, having it backfire on them, and then now I'm somehow responsible for their pain and suffering. So I think that's really frustrating for content creators, and just the negative comments in general are frustrating to deal with, because the moment you start talking about baneful magic online, you have 1,000,000 people in your comments telling you how horrible of a person you are, and it's just a lot to deal with, you know? It's easier to just not post those videos at all because it's a headache. So that would be my opinion on it. Okay, now we are entering the subject of spell work. So these next set of questions are just all about spell work in general and advice for things like that. So the first question is from an anonymous writer, and they are asking, is there a difference between manifestation work and witchcraft? So this is a really complicated question because it depends on your definition of manifestation and it depends on your definition of witchcraft. And people all over are going to have vastly different definitions for those two things. But just to keep it very simple, I would say that witchcraft is a type of manifestation work, but not not all manifestation work is witchcraft. Witchcraft is like a specific style or flavor of manifesting what you want. It's a type of low magic, so you are really manifesting things in the mundane world that you wish to see. So yes, I could consider witchcraft a type of manifestation work, but you have manifestation work that athletes do in college football. I mean, they do visualizations about them winning the next game, and they are literally manifesting their next win by doing those manifestations. Sometimes they have little mantras or little things that they say to help them manifest the win of the next football game. And so that is another type of manifestation work where they're really trying to manipulate their reality to get what they want out of the situation. However, I would not call that witchcraft, obviously. So you can kind of see that like manifestation is a big umbrella term, whereas witchcraft is like a subset just sitting right under that umbrella of the entire manifestation umbrella. I hope that makes sense. Next question is from Witchy So again. I have a pretty complicated question. I hope I'm able to explain it properly. But first of all, I have a mother-in-law. She stays with my husband and I would like to do a banishing ward, whatever is possible and whatever the better choice is, to remove negative or toxic behavior from her whenever she comes home. How do I do a banishing or ward to do that when I don't have a name for that behavior? Is there a way to do it in general where I can ward off these negative toxic behaviors from whoever steps in the house? I've just started getting into this less than a year to be exact, and I'm kind of at a loss what to do. So I actually asked this person for a little bit more clarification because with a complicated situation like this, I really wanted to see if we could get the person's consent. So I asked if we could get the mother-in-law's consent, and unfortunately we cannot get their consent in this case. So that does make it a little bit harder. Whenever you try to do spell work on someone else to manipulate them or influence them to act the way that you want them to act, or to help them with a certain particular thing, but you don't have their consent, their will is not going to be in alignment with your will. So it's kind of like a battle of the wills at that point, because everybody has their own free will, if you believe in that at least. I've kind of discussed this before. I don't know if I necessarily believe in free will, but I do believe that everybody has some sort of personal will and personal power. And so if you can get someone's consent when you're doing some sort of working like this, it's much easier because their will is then in alignment with you and you can proceed with the working. But in this case, when we don't have consent, it really is going to be a battle of your will against their will, and it's really exhausting. So I can give you some options. You might have to try a few until you find one that actually helps. And so this person also said, after some more clarity, I didn't want to do a banishing because I didn't want her to disappear from my life or anything, but then she's creating stress in the house with her behavior, and we've tried so many mundane ways to get her to stop her toxic behavior, but she refuses to stop and it gets worse. So I'm glad to hear that at least the mundane options have been exhausted, because that's always my number one recommendation. Exhaust all the mundane resources first. Now we're getting into the magical stuff to see if we can figure this out. So you have a mother-in-law that's coming home and bringing toxic, negative behavior into the house. They're unwilling to change. What do? There are a couple things that you can do just at the front door to help weed out negative energy from anybody that enters your home that's not even targeted at the mother-in-law. It can be for everyone that walks into that home, making sure it filters out the negative energy. So I really love using sigils or bind runes for something like this. And if you aren't familiar with sigils, I do have a video on that, so feel free to check it out. But you create this symbol that is used for magical purposes, and you can either put it above the door, like above the lip of the door frame, just really small so nobody notices it, or you can even put it under the front door mat, either on a piece of paper, or you can even paint that sigil or that bind rune on the back side of your front door mat. Or maybe you have a rock or a little planter or something next to your front door where you can put that rune, bind rune, or the sigil somewhere around there. But you create this energy to filter the negative energy out, but you create this sigil or bind rune to filter out that negative energy. So you would think of a phrase similar to only positivity enters this home. And that's just totally off the top of my head, by the way, so think of a better phrase if you want to. This is just an example. But you would take a phrase like only positivity enters this home, and then you would create the sigil based on that phrase. And that whole process is outlined in my sigil video, but that is one way of filtering things out from getting into your house. I personally have a house sigil sigil that I put above my doorways and under my front door mat, and everyone that steps into my home, only positive loving energies are allowed to enter this space. I don't want any of that negative crap in my home. If that doesn't work, you can also create a spell jar, which is funny I say this because I don't typically like spell jars. However, for this one particular situation, I think it can be really effective. So what you would do is you would get a jar, and this does require the person's DNA if you want to target someone in particular. So this mother-in-law, if you can get some of their hair, that would be really great, or nail clippings, something like that, to put in the jar. And then you're gonna wanna put cleansing herbs in there, because you're not necessarily doing a banishing, you're doing a deep cleansing on this person, and you're having it in a space to where it's cleansing and capturing that negative energy every time they enter the home. So there are tons of correspondences that you can look up online for cleansings. The ones that are coming to my mind immediately are lemon, salt, and rosemary, but you can really use whatever you want. So I would take a jar, I would put the target's hair in there, or their nail clippings, or some form of DNA. I really love using rosemary for this because rosemary is excellent for not just cleansing, but it's like a deep cleansing. It is, I mean, you can use rosemary in all forms of magic, up to baneful magic. So rosemary is very diverse, and I love working with that plant spirit. Not everyone likes working with rosemary though, so you don't have to go with that option. But I would put the herbs in there. You can even put some crystals in there that correspond to absorbing negative energy. Like if you had a smoky quartz or something, you could put some smoky quartz chips in there, and then have this set somewhere around the front door. So again, like on the outside, if you've got a little rock you can hide it behind, or a bush you can hide it behind or something, or maybe you have an entryway in your home where you can just hide it behind a figurine or something. You can get those really, really tiny spell jars just from the dollar store and hide it somewhere so it catches her negative energy as she walks in the space. You can also create a little sachet bag with herbs and crystals as well. So you could either put a sigil in there for cleansing that negative energy, or just herbs and crystals and that person's DNA or whatever other correspondences you want to put in there. And then you can hide it underneath their bed or underneath their pillow to kind of absorb those negative energies while they're sleeping. I know in this particular instance, you really want to catch your mother-in-law's negative energy as they walk through the front door, but that's another option for you to try as well, so that it can kind of gently cleanse them overnight of that negative energy. And then if none of that works, what I would suggest doing is looking into poppet magic. I did do a whole video on poppets. If you're not familiar, highly recommend checking out that video, but you would want to create a poppet and bind it to this person, your mother-in-law in that case. So you are going to need their DNA again to link the poppet to them. And then essentially anything that you do to the poppet, you're also doing to your mother-in-law. So you can do a really deep, thorough cleansing on that poppet. Or you can even create an amulet or a talisman if you want to go hardcore, if none of these other options are working for you. Worst case scenario, you can create an amulet that is continuously protecting that person from negative energy, or you could create a talisman that absorbs that negative energy and put it on the poppet. Because if you can't get your mother-in-law to wear an amulet or a talisman throughout her day, she won't wear it, but her poppet will. So you create the poppet, you bind it to her, and then you put the amulet or the talisman on the poppet to help absorb those negative energies. So I hope that some of those suggestions help you out. It's a very complex situation for sure. Elvita says, could you give any advice on how to reach trance during meditation and how to incorporate that into rituals? And I apologize if I mispronounced that name. So reaching trance during meditation, it really just takes practice. And I wish that I had a better answer for that. I really wish that I could say, oh, here's this magical little trick that'll just get you there. But it really takes a long time for some people. Some people just naturally have it and they can go into those deep altered states of consciousness. That was not me. I had to meditate every single day for 5 years in order for me to be able to slip in and out of these altered states of consciousness at will. So for me personally, it actually just took a lot of time to meditate and get your brain switched to be able to do something like that. But I also think that just knowing a little bit about the trance states or the different altered states of consciousness really, really helps. So if you aren't familiar with brainwave states, what I would recommend is doing just a little bit of research on that, because right now, as you're watching this video and as I'm talking to you, we are most likely in beta. That is the brainwave state that we are currently in. And then when you start to meditate, you start to slip into alpha, which is a light altered state of consciousness that's almost like a state of flow. So when you are doing something really creative and you're kind of zoning out and not really thinking about anything, you're still alert, but you're just not fully present and thinking about a million different things. Your mind isn't spinning anymore. It's slowed down. You're just in a state of flow. That would be alpha, and that is the altered state of consciousness that's so important to achieve during your spell working. And then some people like to go a little bit deeper into theta. Theta is almost like you're asleep. I mean, it is a very, very deep altered state of consciousness. And then you have delta at the bottom, which is like you're deep, deep, deep in sleep. But I think just learning about those brainwave states a little bit more and what they feel like is going to help you realize that maybe you are already in a trance and you just don't know it. I mean, there's varying levels of the alpha brainwave state. There's like a light alpha, and then there's a deep alpha. So you might already be in a light alpha without even realizing it. Maybe you already are in that state of flow. But if you're past all that and you're looking for additional recommendations, I really, really love using binaural beats. There's a YouTube channel called Meditative Mind, and that's my favorite for binaural beats. And they have all sorts of different frequencies, but binaural beats are really, really helpful in getting you into these altered states of consciousness. So I would recommend meditating with some sort of binaural beat or some sort of frequency for what you're wanting to work on, or maybe even starting to incorporate those into your rituals as well. I almost always have some sort of binaural beats going on, but once you master it, once you get to that point, I don't want to say master because nobody's a master. None of us are masters. We're never going to get to that point. It's a constant work in progress. But once you get really good at slipping into those altered states of consciousness, it really does just take practice, and you will be able to do it so easily that it's like breathing. So just hold faith, keep practicing, you will absolutely get there, and definitely check out binaural beats. Doug asks, in one of your videos, you said that when you are trying to manifest something, you need to avoid naming the thing you don't want and only speaking in terms of the things you do want. But how do you do a banishing spell if you don't want to name the thing that you are trying to banish? This is a really good question, because I think there was one video I did that was how to cast a spell, and I think I've mentioned this in multiple videos as well, that you really want to focus on the thing that you do want, not necessarily the thing that you don't want. So if you have a ton of anxiety, you don't necessarily want to be chanting, I no longer have anxiety. What you would want to do instead is chant something like, I am calm, I am safe, you know, things that are the opposite of feeling anxious. You want to focus on the things that you want, not the things that you don't want. However, in this particular instance, when you're working with like entities or spirits that actually have a name and you are trying to banish them, that is the exception to the rule. And I'm not trying to say that there's any rules in witchcraft, because there are no rules in witchcraft. I've just personally found things that work more successfully than other ways, but that doesn't mean that they're a rule by any means. I am not the authority figure here on anything, of course. But yeah, I think that when you're doing a banishing spell to banish a specific magical entity or a specific spirit or something that actually has a name, I would absolutely think of that as the exception to the rule and continue on with the banishing, naming that person or that spirit or that entity or whatever that you want to banish. So great question. That can be very, very confusing. And again, I am not the authority figure on anything in the magical community, so do what works. Maya asks, some people talk about baneful magic, but no one says about using baneful herbs in that magical practice, and if you do, how would you incorporate these into ritual? So with magical herbs, a lot of the herbs that you use in positive spells, let's say, are the same herbs that you can use in baneful magic. There are some herbs out there that are a little bit more poisonous to work with that people like to throw into baneful magic, but if I'm doing some sort of baneful working, I'm typically using the same or similar herbs that I would use. And again, the herbs itself, it totally depends on what type of baneful working you're working on. So I don't even know if I could give suggestions on specific types of herbs, because it just totally depends on what you're trying to do with your spell. But really, when you're thinking about baneful magic, you want to think of anything rotting, decaying, things that are disgusting, things are just repugnant, you know? You want to bring in that energy into your baneful working. So if you have a rose, let's take a rose for example. I use roses all the time in happy spells or whatever spells I want. But the moment that rose starts dying and decaying and maybe becomes a little bit moldy, you could absolutely use that in a baneful spell, particularly related to love or a relationship gone wrong or something like that. So think about things that are just rotting, moldy, disgusting. It's pretty easy. I feel like a lot of people overthink baneful magic and they think it's something maybe more than it actually is, but you really can just use disgusting ingredients in baneful magic and it works great. And I am not here to tell you what to do or what not to do when it comes to the ethics of baneful magic, so I am going to trust that everyone is making the best decision for themselves. Crystal Kelly asks, I have trouble with visualization. Where do I start with manifesting if I cannot properly visualize? Okay, so this topic is actually something that I do want to make a video on in the future because there's so many things that I could say right now, and I'm having a hard time trying to find how to condense this down. So just know that I'll probably do a video on this in the future because there's so much. It really just depends if you are a person that absolutely can't visualize at all, because there are people in the world that no matter how hard they try, their brains are not wired that way, they cannot visualize. However, that is actually a very small percentage of the population. And so a lot of people that feel like that they can't visualize may actually can visualize, they just haven't found the right techniques yet to help them. So it really just kind of depends on which category you fall in. But if you are somebody that just can't visualize at all, no matter what you do, physical representations are fantastic. So there is absolutely nothing wrong with literally setting up a visual in front of you when you're doing your spell work. That's one of the reasons why I like poppets so much. And I have a poppet that is bound to me specifically. So I use my poppet that represents me in a working. When I'm doing a spell on myself, I have my poppet present and it serves as a focal point. So instead of trying to visualize myself doing something, I can actually look at my poppet in this physical world that is bound to me and then do that working around it. And then anything I do to the poppet is also being done to me. And so you can have these physical representations of the people. You can have candles that represent certain people in your life. You can even paint a picture if you want to and have that spread out before you. Some people like to incorporate technology into this and create pictures up on their screens to look at for specific imagery that you want for a spell. So you can have these physical correspondences that serve as these focal points, and you don't necessarily have to visualize that intention. Yes, visualizing is really, really nice in spell work, but it's not necessary. I would say that visualizing for me is essential. I mean, because I love visualization, but that's not going to be the case for everybody. And I still believe that people can manifest without really being able to fully visualize in that way. However, if you are open to potentially trying to get better with your visualization skills, what you can do is incorporate touch into this. So if you have something that you are touching, like let's say you take a big red apple and you put it in your hand and you are looking at this apple, you are turning it around, looking at all the different angles, and then close your eyes and try to reproduce that image of the big red apple. And then try turning that apple in your mind the same way that you turned the apple in real life. And if the turning part is really hard, what you can do is you can go even slower than that. You can hold an apple at this angle, close your eyes and visualize that apple. Hold the apple at a different angle, look at it, visualize that, and then close your eyes and visualize that apple again. And once you get really good with turning the apple in your mind, you can move to something larger. Like let's say you have a tree in the park or a tree in your backyard or something. You can put your hand up to the tree and feel the tree. You can see it, you can feel it. At that point, you can close your eyes and then try to produce that image of the tree in your mind. And then you just start slowly building from there. See if you can make the branches appear in your visualization without actually looking at them in real life. What do those branches look like? And if you can't see the branches yet, open your eyes again, look up at the tree branches, and then keep going from there. And you just kind of keep building on until you eventually can just produce an image of a tree in your brain without having to actually be touching a tree or next to a tree or anything like that. And you just keep on going. But again, there's so much that I could say here when it comes to visualization, so I hope that helps, but I do plan to do a video in the future. I'm not sure when I'm going to get to it though, because I have pages and pages of videos that I want to do that have been requested and I haven't gotten to them yet. I'm working on it, I promise. Okay, I think I'm going to do one more section and then I'm going to go eat and hang out for a couple hours, and then I'm going to come back and record more. I've already been recording for maybe 2 or 3 hours at this point. Hopefully I'm able to cut this down. I have a tendency, I want to give so much information for every single question, but this video, if I don't cut it down, it's going to be an 8-hour video. It really is. So I need to start answering these a little bit shorter. So anyways, the next category that we're getting into is mental health and magic, is kind of what I'm calling it. It's everything regarding our mental health in the occult community. And there were actually quite a bit of questions in this category. So the first question is from Ollie. What is your advice to practitioners who feel disconnected in their craft? I've felt a bit out of touch recently and I miss that inquisitive spirit that I once had. So the answer to this, I think, is really just going to differ. Everyone is so different. What works for one person may not work for someone else. But what I would say, just as general advice to anybody going through this, is to go back to your childhood. Find something that made you really, really excited and almost obsessed as a child. Something to where you can get back to that childlike spirit and just play and have fun. So let's say, for example, you were super into dragons as a child. Get into dragon magic, start researching what it's like to work with a dragon and go down that whole rabbit hole. Or maybe you were a person that liked to work with fairies, but you've never done research on the fae. Maybe you were a person that was obsessed with vampires, and up until recently, you didn't know that, this is me talking about myself, you didn't know that there were actual people in the world that identified as vampires, and there's a whole practice of vampiric magic, which I did do a video on. Okay, now I'm being a little bit too specific towards myself, but find things that you were really, really obsessed with as a child and then just run with it. Even if you weren't obsessed with fantasy things, let's say, maybe you were obsessed with video games or some sort of game that you just could not put down and you just wanted to play it forever. What was that game and what did you enjoy doing with it, and how can you incorporate that into your magical practice? For me, I do play a lot of video games even today as an adult. I play a lot. Right now I'm really stuck on Skyrim, but what I like to do is I like to take inspiration from my video games and incorporate that into my magical practice. And I'm actually going to talk about that a little bit further when there's a question about technology in this video, and there's also a question about chaos magic in this video. So I'm going to talk about the video game aspect a little bit further in that question, but you get the point. Find whatever made your inner child just so excited and giddy. That way you can reconnect with that playful spirit. And maybe you're like me and reading and researching is fun for you. Not everybody finds that enjoyable, but I really love researching in my spare time because I'm a weirdo. I don't know. That's just how I am. So for me, when I'm feeling a little bit disconnected from my craft and I'm not feeling like I want to do any magic or anything, even just researching something brand new that I've never heard of in my life, that can spark the fire again, because then I start going down a whole new rabbit hole and I'm like, well, what is this? What is that? I need to know the answer. But another thing that I would say too is that it's okay to take a break from your magical practice. I think every single practitioner hits this point of burnout where they just really aren't called to do spell work. They don't really want to sit at their altar anymore. So, if that's the case, just give yourself some time to work through it. You don't have to jump into anything again. And also just sprucing up your space can be really helpful too. Like declutter your entire area. Get rid of everything that you don't use and then design a whole new area where you can do magic. I found that once I redid this whole witchy room that I'm in, I am so much more likely to do magic in here now because it's amazing in here. I love this room so much. Side note, I am doing that witchy room tour. I think I'm gonna do that one next week. But anyways, it's just nice getting your space set up to where you can actually take pride in it. And even if you don't have like a whole room to dedicate to magic, what you can do is just redo your altar space. Or if you have a little travel altar or an altar that you have to hide under your bed because you live with people that don't approve of your magical practice, whatever that looks like, take it apart, completely redo it, and just get some new inspiration and some fresh life in there. There's so much more that I want to say on this subject, but I hope that that helps a little bit. The next question is from Luna. I would love your take on getting through a dark night of the soul period. I've recently entered one and it's been really challenging to keep my faith in the divine and magic strong when I can't seem to hear from or talk to spirit like usual. Also, my physical environment has reflected this. I've had a massive year of growth and transformation, felt that things were going to change around me because of this, but now all is still and stagnant and I'm in the exact same physical place that I was as essentially a different person. So I guess I'm curious about your experiences and advice on stagnation with manifestation. So this is kind of a similar question, a little bit different, but kind of similar. And I feel like I've gone through this period so many times, especially, I mean, if you've been around this channel for a while, you know that I have had my history of mental health issues in the past. I really struggled with depression for a really long time. I've struggled with anxiety. I personally also have a form of PTSD, and whenever you have mental health issues, it can be really frustrating because there are moments of stagnation where you can't hear spirit anymore. And it's lonely. Like, I would go 8 months at a time without hearing a single spirit or being able to talk to a deity or anything. It was so lonely and isolating. And then you start to get to this point where you're like, did I make it all up to begin with? Is this, you know, you start to question your own sanity a little bit because it's been so long since you had some sort of divine interaction or some sort of, I don't know, deep sense of knowing or intuition or whatever. So there have been periods in my life where I felt really low. And what I've personally noticed, this is probably not the answer that you're looking for, but this is just my own personal experience here. I've noticed that I personally hit a point of burnout. When there are so many different life changes happening for you and you've leveled up, so to speak, it's almost like, at least how it was for me, I was ready to take that next step because I was like, okay, I just went through a ton of transformations. I'm ready now. I'm ready for everything. Like, universe, guide me, send me all the messages. I'm ready to have my intuition firing off, and then silence. There's absolutely nothing, and I'm not sure why. And what I found in those situations is because I'm exhausted and I don't know it. I don't actually realize that I'm exhausted until I sit down and think about it. So I don't know if that's the situation for you, but you may have hit a point where you need to recuperate after all of those transformations that you just went through and all of the things going on in your life. You may be in a period where you're not able to receive those messages from spirit or your deity or whoever it is that you work with because your body is exhausted and it needs time to recuperate. So I would really focus on recuperating in other ways, like getting into creative projects again that are not magically related, and then they can help you kind of slowly get back into your magic through that creativity process. So similar to what I said in the first question, finding things that make you feel playful and childlike again, getting creative with arts and crafts or building things. Like, what really sparks that creativity for you? Is it painting? Is it building a structure? What does that look like for you? And just being creative in any capacity, I feel like really fuels the fire and helps your body recover from these massive transformations to where you can start receiving those messages again. And I know that's not the answer that anybody wants to hear, because nobody wants to hear rest. Take a deep breath and just don't do anything, because I certainly don't want to hear that. Like, I want to go. I'm ready to go. I want to go and do all this stuff with my magic. Like, I'm ready to transcend to the next level, and it's frustrating to be slowed down by something so mundane as your body just needing to rest and recuperate. And maybe you're not in the same situation as me, but I thought I'd just throw that out there. I hope that helps. It would be a lot easier if I had maybe a little bit more clarity on the situation, but I'm hoping that some of that advice is applicable to your situation. The next question is from Danny. What do I do for panic attacks? So I just want to, first of all, Danny, I'm so sorry that you experienced that. Me too. I feel you. Okay, so I do have to say that I am not a mental health professional. I have to say that on my video. I am not liable for anything. I am just sharing the knowledge that I have learned over time with my personal panic attacks and the situation that I've been recovering from a type of PTSD and things like that, and just having anxiety in general. So I'm going to talk about a couple mundane things and a couple magical things. Let's start with the mundane things really quick. When I feel like a panic attack is about to come on, the best thing that you can do, in my opinion, is two things. You either want to activate your prefrontal cortex or just your decision-making center or your rational mind or something that helps you get out of your emotional space in your brain, which we'll talk about in a second, or you want to activate your vagus nerve. And your vagus nerve is what connects, well, I'm not going to get super sciencey, but it runs the whole thing. It connects your gut and your brain. And there's a lot of chemicals that transfer between your brain and your gut. And by stimulating that vagus nerve, what you can do is you can actually help stop a panic attack before it starts. So you really want to do this before the panic attack has already started. In that moment, when you start to feel, I think I might be having a panic attack coming on, either stimulate your brain or stimulate the vagus nerve. So let's start with the brain one. So I find that puzzles are really, really helpful. I have an app on my phone. It's like, I think it's called like Lily's Garden or something ridiculous. It's basically just this puzzle game. It's similar to Candy Crush, where I'm forced to get into my rational brain and get out of the emotional brain, because both of those have a really hard time running together at the same time. So if you're super, super emotional, it actually turns off your prefrontal cortex functioning, and it's really hard to make decisions when you're super, super emotional because of that. So I find, for me personally, it's really good to lean into my rational brain where I'm doing puzzles and I'm having to really think really hard, and it gets me away from the emotion associated to a panic attack. Because when you're about to have a panic attack, you get super emotional of, oh my gosh, it's happening again. I don't want this to happen again. Am I dying? I'm freaking out. And so you want to get yourself out of that immediately. So download a puzzle on your phone that you can just do in those moments, and literally lay down on the floor or on the bed or wherever, put some weight on your chest, because having weight on your chest is also a way to help reduce the anxiety, and just do a puzzle on your phone. Seriously, it does wonders. Switching to the vagus nerve stimulation, what you can do for this is eat ice chips. I know it sounds really insane, but you get a cup of ice and you just lay down in your bed, weight on your chest, and eating ice chips. Sometimes I'll do both. I'll have a puzzle in one hand and I will be eating ice chips in the other. And eating the ice chips, it kind of like shocks your system a little bit and helps get you out of that emotional space, and stimulating that nerve helps reduce the anxiety. So those are the two mundane things that I would say have worked the best for me. And I know that I didn't, okay, for anybody watching this that is a psychology nerd like me, because I am studying psychology as one of my majors. I know I probably did not use all of that terminology correctly, but I'm also talking fast and trying to get my point across. So don't judge me too harshly for not using these scientific terms for everything. I just want to throw that out there as a psychology major. I just want to make sure I said that. But let's talk about magical solutions. I have found one solution for me that has worked wonders, and that's really the only one that I'm going to talk about, because I've tried a million different types of spells for my anxiety and nothing's really worked. So what I did is I created a personal servitor. I'll link that video down below in the description box. Check it out. It'll tell you what servitors are and what they can do for you. It's like a personal servant. And so what I do anytime that I'm feeling extremely anxious or like I'm about to have a panic attack, what I visualize is pushing that black, sticky, oily energy out of my body. And my personal servitor, it sounds insane, but he literally comes in like a knight in shining armor with a sword and everything and just slashes through all of that anxiety. He's literally slashing all of these black cords from my body and freeing me from this prison that I feel like that I'm stuck in, because it's a nightmare. It is a living nightmare to have a panic attack. So I have this servitor that comes in and cuts all of these cords off of my body that are related to the anxiety, and it's all done through visualization. So I would recommend getting a servitor for self-protection. I have one for my house as well, but that's a whole different situation. This is a servitor that I have specifically for me that helps protect me throughout the day and also helps with my anxiety and panic attacks. And so when I'm talking to somebody in the regular mundane world, and I have to mask, and I have to feel like I'm in that moment of, oh my gosh, I'm gonna go into a panic attack, but I don't want this person to freak out. I don't want to be weird. So I have to put a mask on my face to pretend I'm not going into a panic attack as they're talking to me. I visualize pushing that anxiety out almost like a strainer, like there's a strainer on my head and it's coming out of these holes, and then my servitor coming in and cutting it all off. So the servitor has literally changed my life, and I definitely recommend looking into a magical entity like that to help you with protection. Next question comes from Moonlight. How do you feel about people practicing with mental health issues? There is a lot of debate I noticed, but what I don't get is the ones who have a problem with it do not usually have mental health issues themselves. And if you are okay with it, if in your do you do anything special or spell work to try to lift yourself up? So I get so frustrated with people who say that you cannot practice when you are mentally ill or you have some sort of neurological condition, because that is such a privileged way of thinking and operating. And in my personal experience with the mental health issues that I've faced, I have had no problem manifesting exactly what I want. My magic gets great results, and I've had no problem practicing during those times where I am struggling. The idea that people can't practice when they're sad or when they're anxious or whatever. Yes, you want to be in the most energetically cleansed space that you can possibly be in when you're doing some sort of ritual. A lot of people think that you need to be pure, or at least the most pure version of yourself that you can possibly be before performing some type of ritual. That's like when you see in ceremonial magic, you see the lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram, or there's all these different, banishing rituals and invoking rituals and things like that. You want yourself to be in a very pure state before you go into any sort of high magic or ceremonial magic. And with low magic, some of that translates as well. You really want to cleanse the items that you're using. You want to cleanse yourself. You want to cleanse your space and then do your spell. And although that is ideal, and I think that we should be as pure as we can be in that moment and not try to bring those negative energies into our working, I don't think that that's humanly possible to be 100% pure. It's almost the same idea as trying to tell women that we cannot practice magic when we're menstruating. That really frustrates me because that just goes back to the idea of a menstruation process being impure, that women who are menstruating are not pure and therefore they cannot partake in magic during that time. And that's a really frustrating way to look at mental health. To call a neurotypical person who does not experience any sort of mental health fluctuations, to call them pure, and then to call someone who is, say, neurodivergent impure is really frustrating, and I don't agree with that. And I know that there are people that are going to disagree with me, but frankly, I don't really care, because in my magical practice, I've seen some incredible results, and I am a neurodivergent person myself, so that's my opinion on that. And as far as doing anything special to try to lift myself up, yes. So if I am in a funk, I really do try to avoid, like, I'm not gonna be doing a working for someone that I love, like a really in-depth, deep ritual when I'm feeling really depressed and anxious, because first and foremost, I just don't want to, because I don't feel good and the energy isn't there. I could do it if I wanted to, but I really think it's just better to take care of ourselves in that moment. That's not to say that you can't do the ritual, but what I try to do in those cases, let's say it's time sensitive and I need to do a binding spell for someone that I love, like today. It needs to happen today, but I'm going through these issues right now. I'm in a depressive slump, or I'm having a lot of anxiety today. There are ways to kind of purify yourself before ritual, even if you are feeling that way. So if you want to go the more ceremonial route, you can do something like the LBRP, the lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram. But if you're not into ceremonial magic, you can do something simple as a ritual bath, where you literally get in the tub with some cleansing herbs and you visualize all of those energies leaving your body and soaking out into the water, and then draining the water down the drain. And then you take a quick shower, obviously, to rinse off. There's a whole method to ritual baths, but I would physically clean myself and then spiritually clean myself before going into a big ritual like that. But if I'm just gonna do like a quick spell for myself or something, I mean, you're really just gonna have to do what works best for you, but I would say that I have no problem practicing in those states. Shadow Fox says, as a fellow practitioner and a psychology nerd, what is your opinion on bringing the occult practices or beliefs into therapy sessions? Aside from respecting the patient's beliefs, of course. As you know, magical thinking is often looked down upon within the scientific community, and the placebo effect is quite strong in both the scientific and magical communities. Do you think it would be better to serve the patients to incorporate a more holistic approach via magical practices with consent, as they already do with aromatherapy, and how rituals can restructure neural pathways and thus heal certain issues like depression? Or do you think that it would be an ethical and scientific breach of conduct? Should incorporating such practices result in a therapist to lose their license? Do you think the scientific community is already utilizing magical practices within their treatments and simply not admitting it, or giving the magical community the recognition they deserve for certain treatments? Ooh, this is such a good question. I'm so excited to talk about this. Okay, where do I even want to begin with this? I think it would be fantastic to bring magic into therapy sessions, but it would have to be done in a very careful way. There was a point where I thought of becoming a clinical psychologist and doing traditional counseling, until I realized that I'm an introvert and that would be so beyond draining for me, and I don't plan to do that with my psych degree at all. Not interested in it. But I did think about incorporating magic and paganism into that, and how that would look for clients. And I think there actually are therapists that do that. I do know therapists that are psychologists and witches. So I think there are some psychologists out there that are already doing stuff like this. And this is the same exact thing, to me at least, as medicine men and women across time and space. I mean, if we look back to when people were living in isolated villages all over the world, you had the one medicine woman or the one medicine man, and sometimes they had visions and dreams, and they kind of helped you in every capacity. It was very, very holistic, mainly because it was just a small village at the time. There weren't a lot of resources, and so you had one person or maybe just a couple people that did the medicine for the entire village, and so it was very, very holistic. But I think that there are some psychologists that are doing that now, and I don't see any difference in those two practices. I think that being holistic is the way to go. I have a little bit of an extra perspective on this as well, because I was a medical massage therapist for a really long time, and I worked in a hospital. I mainly worked on patients that were in rehabilitation medicine. So we were rehabbing them after surgery and before surgery, and sometimes cancer patients and things like that. And then also being a psychology major, I've really kind of seen the spiritual point where the body and the mind intersect, and we can't fully explain it. I mean, for example, being a massage therapist for 7 years now, I can work on someone's body and I can touch their muscles and I can feel by the texture what personality they have. And I know that sounds insane, but there is absolutely a correlation between what's going on in your brain and what's going on in your muscles. And I can't scientifically prove that yet, but I can sit down and touch someone's body without them speaking to me whatsoever, and I will know a lot about them and a lot about their life. And I think that the same applies to therapy sessions where you're bringing in spell work or maybe some psychic abilities. Then again, my perception is probably going to be different from everyone else because I am a medical intuitive. So there's that whole component to consider as well. But I think it's a great thing. I think it's fantastic if the client wants healing and they're getting healing and it's not in any sort of breach of contract from what they personally believe. If they are consenting to everything that's happening, I don't see why that's a bad thing at all. Am I even answering the question right now, or am I just rambling? I don't even know. But yeah, I think it's fantastic, and I think that the Western world, at least in my experience, they love to section off different parts of the body and not approach it from a holistic standpoint. Because if you look at Eastern cultures and Eastern medicine, they approach the body in a very holistic way. I mean, it's mind, body, soul, all of it wrapped in one, affects each other. But unfortunately with Western medicine, I've seen so many times that doctors are trying to treat one particular area of that person's body, but that's not the problem, that's a symptom. And so I think that Western medicine really does us a disservice sometimes by focusing on the symptoms and not the actual problems. So I'm kind of repeating myself here, but I think it's an amazing thing to work holistically with the body, and I would love to eventually see more practitioners incorporating magic and things like that into their therapy sessions. Okay, last question in this category is from Cyrus Citrine. How do you stay confident in your work, especially if met by repetitive failure? Do you have a method on how to counter this negative mindset, like nothing I do works, so why bother, and other things that fall under that? Okay, so this kind of plays into what we've been talking about previously in the spellwork category. I don't know if I probably should have put this in the spellwork category. It's not necessarily mental health related. Well, it's about confidence, but anyways. So when it comes to building confidence in your craft, you definitely have to start so small. I mean, really, really small. As in, start by when you're driving down the street, and let's say you're driving to the grocery store, you are going to start by manifesting a parking spot right up at the front, right where you want it to be. Or maybe you don't like parking up in the front, I don't know, but try to manifest the exact parking spot that you want, and you say these affirmations to yourself, like, there is always abundant parking for me, I always find the right parking spot, there's always available parking right up at the front of the store just for me, or if you want to call it princess parking, whatever. But you start small with stuff like that, and this is just an example, of course, and then you work up to bigger things, and you start to gain this confidence, because when you start manifesting these small things, you're like, oh, I did it. There's a parking spot right there. And yes, we could rationally explain that away of there was always going to be a parking spot there for you, whether you did the spell or not. But at that point, who cares? Because you're just trying to work on increasing your confidence. And so if there is a parking spot up at the front of that grocery store, you are going to celebrate that as a win. You are going to treat that as your spell was successful. And I would also start looking at situations in your life where things are already kind of going to work in your favor anyways. So let's say you're applying for a job for this position and you're pretty sure you already got the job anyways. You're not really worried about it. It's maybe like an 80% yes versus a 20% no. Do some spell work to secure your position in that job and help push it from an 80% to 100%, just to give it that little extra oomph, even though it's something that you already know you're probably going to get. And then when you do get that job, you need to celebrate. You need to throw a big celebration, not just for getting the job, but for making your magic work and for actually manifesting that job and solidifying that job. You need to celebrate as if it's the biggest thing that you've ever done in your entire life. And doing these celebrations is really going to build your confidence over time. It's almost kind of like brainwashing yourself, but in the best way possible. So if you start with these really, really small achievements, then you can start branching out to larger things and larger things until you get to the point where you have this moment of, holy shit, I just did that. I just manifested that out of almost nothing, it seems like. So definitely start small, slowly work your way up. Okay, I'm gonna go take a break and eat dinner. It is starting to get dark outside, so I'm gonna go eat dinner, and then when we come back, we're gonna talk about controversial topics. Okay, I'm not gonna lie to y'all, it's the next morning. I went to go eat dinner last night and then I just went into a food coma and I was exhausted. So it's the next day, but I put the same outfit on for continuity of this video. So let's get into some controversy. Sage asks, I don't know if it would be too controversial, but I am curious about your take on Aleister Crowley and Thelema. I've seen a lot of conflicting arguments about him and Thelema. I really thought long and hard how I wanted to answer this because what I really want to say is going to make the entire internet so angry. And so I thought about it and I was like, do I say it? Do I do it? I think I'm just gonna say it, but before you come after me with guns blazing, just let me say my entire piece on Aleister Crowley first. And by the way, I've been corrected. It's Aleister Crowley, not Aleister Crowley, like everybody thinks. So if you're wondering why I'm pronouncing it that way, I'm trying to be as accurate as possible. But let me just give you some vulnerable honesty when it comes to Aleister Crowley. And I'm actually really, really glad that this question was asked so I had an opportunity to speak about this. I am so sick and tired of hearing this man's name. I don't understand why everyone in the occult community is so obsessed with him. Well, I do kind of understand because he's a very, very controversial figure in occult history and he's responsible for a lot of stuff. I get that. However, there are so many other occult practitioners in the history of magic and the occult that were so instrumental in shaping the way that we do things today. And I just wish that we could put our focus towards other people instead of Aleister Crowley. I'm not really sure why Crowley gets so much attention. It's probably because he was very radical and, like I said, very controversial. My personal opinion on him is that he was a spoiled man with a lot of privilege. He was very narcissistic. In my opinion, he was not a good person at all. However, again, before you come at me with the guns blazing, however, even though I don't like Aleister Crowley as a person, I do have friends that are Thelemites. And actually, I did a video, it was an interview with a Thelemite with Mavius Lynn. Love Mavius Lynn. Definitely go check out that interview that we did. And that really kind of changed the way that I look at Aleister Crowley and Thelema, because I personally had never been interested in anything that man had to say. I didn't care because he was a raging narcissist and I just didn't want to give any more energy and effort to him. But in talking to my friends that are Thelemites, yes, Crowley was some sort of a prophet who had this divine message come through him for Thelema. The way that, at least from my understanding, from the Thelemites that I have talked to, and again, my perspective on this is limited because I have never been a Thelemite. I've never been interested in becoming a Thelemite. But my mind has been a little bit more open to the possibility because the way that they look at Crowley is not like he's this prophet that needs to be worshipped. He's not this god. I mean, there are some in the community that really idolize him, but that's a whole separate situation that I'm not even going to talk about in this video. But really, Thelema is about recognizing the message that he had, not necessarily recognizing the man who said the message, if that makes sense. So you kind of have to separate the man from the message because he was channeling divine spirit when he wrote the Book of the Law. And it's really the message from spirit that Thelemites are focusing on, not necessarily Aleister Crowley himself. So even though he was a troubled man and he had a lot of problems, the messages that he gave to the universe to create this organization of Thelema has been incredibly helpful for so many people, helping them get in line with their holy guardian angel and living in their true will and doing things that align themselves with their true will. I think that that is something really, really incredible. So I actually think that Thelema gets a bad reputation, unfortunately, because it was founded by Aleister Crowley and his whole reputation that precedes him. But I think that Thelema can be a life-changing practice for somebody. And if somebody wants to practice Thelema, go for it. I think that's wonderful. For me, however, I still struggle to really separate the man from the message, and that's why I've never really had any sort of desire to go into Thelema. But as I get older and I'm able to kind of separate him from the message a little bit more, I am interested in looking more into Thelema. Not saying I want to become a Thelemite, but I do want to understand it a little bit better. I don't want to stop myself from learning something potentially incredible that could change my life just because of my own personal biases about a privileged man that I don't really care for. So that is my true, honest thoughts about Aleister Crowley. Ultimately, he was a troubled man, don't really care about him, but I think that what he built with Thelema has been life-changing for many people, and I think it's a wonderful thing. There's one more thing that I wanted to say on this topic, is that there is a problem in ceremonial magic spheres, and this is not just Thelema, although Thelema gets a really bad reputation of this, but I think that other ceremonial magic practices, it's the same. You have troublemakers in every single culture, right? You always have the ones that are giving a bad reputation to the rest of them, and that's not fair. But there's a problem in ceremonial magic spheres where women are not regarded as equals to men sometimes. It is really frustrating being a woman and trying to practice ceremonial magic in some sort of organization that has been predominantly run by men, and it has not been very inclusive in the past. And so there's still a little bit of sexism that exists within these ceremonial magic traditions. And so I think that's also why Thelema gets such a bad reputation sometimes, because there is that sexist behavior depending on the group that you're working with, of course. I'm not saying that this is all Thelema practitioners, but I do know that my personal friends that are Thelemites, they are female, and they do experience a lot of resistance, a lot of sexist comments, a lot of just not taking them seriously in the practice. So that can be super, super frustrating. So I just wanted to put that out there, that that is still a thing. Women are not necessarily super welcome in certain spaces. But again, that's not just Thelema. That's, unfortunately, that is really common in a lot of different ceremonial magic traditions. I know somebody is going to come after me somewhere for what I just said, but I don't care. I said what I said. I said it. Next question is from Peaches. Is it ever okay to buy occult related items like a hand sculpture you showed in one of your videos just for aesthetic purposes? I have 2 tarot decks that are monster related. Actually, one is Vlad the Impaler related. Would anyone in the occult community find this offensive? This was definitely not my intention. I think it is absolutely okay to buy occult related items just for the aesthetic. Nothing wrong with that. And if somebody is getting offended by that, they need to check their own ego. It's really not that big of a deal, in my opinion. However, I will say there is a little bit of a gray area when you're working with symbols that belong to specific traditions that are closed. So just be mindful of that. Or if you have a statue of a certain god or goddess and you're using it for aesthetic purposes and not necessarily because you want to work with that god or goddess, and then you're treating the statue really poorly, I suppose maybe somebody who does worship that god or goddess somewhere in the world could potentially get offended by that use. But honestly, as long as you're being careful and not using symbols that are related to some sort of closed practice, I think that's perfectly fine. Like the statue that I had, I think you might be talking about this one, this statue that I have of the hand, perfectly fine to just use it for aesthetic purposes and not actually use it for a magical tradition. Miramari asks, hot take, is working with ancestral spirits beneficial for someone who lives on the land of their ancestors, hence no need of reconnecting with roots, or is it better to work with spirits of the land in this case? And if working with ancestors is beneficial, how far in the past should one go? What's the use of working with ancestral spirits beyond reconnecting to our own roots? And how to work with really ancient spirits, like before 2350 BCE ancient, that claims that he is my ancestor? I cannot disprove this claim. It's within the realm of possibility. compatibility. Divination background check also came out positive. Okay, so there's actually quite a bit to unpack here, and I'm gonna try to keep my answer concise because I know this video is getting super, super long. So I'll try to be as concise as possible. But in my instance, I live on a land where I am not native here. And so the land spirits here are not necessarily my biological ancestors. So I work with both. I work with the land spirits and I work with my biological ancestors. However, if you are living on land that you are native to, it kind of rolls into one. The land spirits are potentially your biological ancestors, or at least some sort of form of that. And I personally love working with ancestors for protection. I have found that protection is really potent with ancestors beyond any other magical entity or spirit that I have worked with in the past. Yes, I have a lot of different forms of protection magic that I do, but there is nothing compared to ancestral magic when it comes to protecting yourself or protecting your property. If you have land spirits that you've built a relationship with, you can have them assist you in home protection. They will protect the land alongside you. So that's one of the biggest benefits that I've seen personally. And as far as my answer to this is complicated because I don't work with specific ancestors. I work with my entire ancestral line. So it's not like I'm working with just my grandma or just my great-great-grandfather or something like that. I actually don't work with any ancestors that are close to me in that way, if that makes sense. So I work with the entire ancestral line. When I call them in, I call in everybody, and I'm talking to ancestors that go way back. So for me personally, I find that it's really kind of just the same as working with one individual ancestor, except for the fact, okay, so if you're gonna work with one ancestor, say your grandma, you're really going to be talking to her in a way that she would want to be talked to. You're going to give offerings that really relate to her. Like if she always liked chamomile tea, maybe you would always sit down with a cup of chamomile tea to offer that to her while you do your divination and while you're talking to her and doing that ancestral work. But when you're working with older spirits, like much, much older, and you don't know what they like, you don't really know their personality that well because they're from generations back, you just kind of want to be a little bit more generalized. So instead of the chamomile tea or something, what you would want to do is research different drinks or food items or something to that particular region that was really, really popular or sought after or seen as really hard to get. Maybe sugar was really hard to get during that time frame, and so you want to put out a cup of tea with some sugar in it. Maybe that would be a really, really good offering. Or anything like mead, wine, whiskey, rum. All of those are pretty generic, and you can use those for offerings to older spirits that you don't necessarily know what they like for offerings or know how to talk to them yet. But it really is just going to be a trial and error. So it sounds like that you enjoy doing tarot, which me too. That's typically how I talk to my ancestors. And so you might want to sit down and do an interview process with that spirit. Put out some sort of offering, some sort of alcohol or a baked good or whatever, and then literally do an interview with your tarot deck and that spirit present. Bring them into the space. You can cast Sacred Space or however you want to do that. And then you would ask a question. I usually start with, who are you? And then I would draw a card or maybe a couple clarifier cards just in case. And then my second question would be, who are you to me? As in, what is our relationship? Who are you going to be for me? And how do I address you? What perspective am I operating out of right now? And then just continue down the line with your questions. Like, what can you help me with? What can I do for you? What do you like? You know, just kind of get to know them a little bit more. So I definitely recommend sitting down and doing an interview process with your tarot deck and the spirit. Make sure you bring an offering. Another benefit that I've seen with ancestral work is, I've talked about this in my ancestral magic video just briefly, but I work a lot with archetypal ancestors. So I do work with my whole biological line, but I also work with these archetypal ancestors, which are people that you identify with on a deep soul level that you're not necessarily related to. And so let's say you are a poet or something, and all of the poets in the past could potentially be an archetypal ancestor for you, somebody that you really, really resonate. There's certain scientists that I really, really resonate with. And so when I'm trying to channel a certain type of energy in a ritual, or if I'm trying to achieve something in my daily life, I have found that working working with archetypal ancestors in particular can be really helpful, because there are a lot of scientists and a lot of writers that I really, really resonate with, and I want them to help me with scientific discoveries potentially in the future and all the writing projects that I have going on. So that's another way that ancestral work can be really, really beneficial, is by using these archetypes. Hope that answers your question. The next one is from Gills. In your opinion, would it be wrong to place protection around a loved one without their knowing, or to gift them an amulet or talisman of protection without telling them the true purpose? This is going to entirely depend on your opinion. Everybody has their own level of ethics. I've mentioned previously in this video, I'm a little bit of a morally gray person, so I personally don't see anything wrong with doing something like that. Again, it's just up to the person, the individual. For me personally, I have no problem creating some sort of protection amulet for someone. And my mom, for example, or somebody in my family, they don't particularly care for witchcraft. They don't understand what I do. It makes them feel uncomfortable. But do I do things to protect them still without them knowing it? Yes. Does that magic work? Yes. I'm not going to tell them what I'm doing because I have their best interest in mind, and some people may ethically say that I need their consent to do any sort of working and I really shouldn't be doing that, but everyone has their own ethical limitations, so you absolutely have to decide that for yourself. Okay, next category, we are going to move on to my personal experiences. So Aline asks, and I apologize if I just mispronounced that name, but the question is, I wanted to ask about your conversion from Buddhism to witchcraft conversion. I love witchcraft, but I'm also into Buddhism, and I'm a bit confused on how to combine both beliefs. I've learned from Buddhism that in order to relieve myself from suffering, it's important to let go of expectation and even desire. If you don't desire anything more than what you already have, you can be satisfied with everything, if I understood that right. But in witchcraft, especially low magic, you need to want something in order to manifest it, right? So how do you combine both beliefs? I want to be happy, and I'm sure Buddhism can help me, but I certainly don't want to give up witchcraft. I love the craft and the mysticism. I would love to hear your perspective on that. So I first want to start with, yes, I was a Buddhist. I had a Buddhist phase for 5 years, and it was deeply important to me, and I wasn't into anything witchcraft or pagan related during that time. It was just Buddhism for me. However, I don't know if I was a particularly good Buddhist, because I was always, in the back of my mind, a chaos magician without even really realizing that I was. So just kind of keep that in mind as I'm talking here. I personally felt like, and by the way, I am not an authority figure on Buddhism in general, but I felt like when I was practicing Buddhism by itself, first of all, it did help me work on my ego. I learned so much, and that transformation changed my life, and I will never be the same person again. And yes, so attachment is the root of all suffering. And the idea is to somewhat detach yourself from this reality in order to avoid that suffering, but not necessarily all the way. You don't have to go into full detachment mode. I mean, yes, we are trying to achieve enlightenment in Buddhism, and we're trying to work with the ego, but it's almost like walking alongside the bull rather than pushing the bull to get it to do what you want it to do. And the bull represents our ego. Yes, I think it's important for us to strive towards ego death. And for anybody that isn't familiar, ego it's who you are. It's your personality, it's your place in this world, it's what you like, what you don't like, everything that you've attached to make yourself this person. I am Ivy. That is my ego. And I think it's important to strive towards ego death, towards shedding those attachments and really transcending beyond that. However, I don't personally think it's possible for anybody to actually achieve ego death during this lifetime until we die, until we transcend to the next space. And so while we're here on this earth living with our ego, it's kind of like a checks and balances system. All my personal opinion, I know that there are some people practicing Buddhism that might disagree with me here, but I felt like when I was practicing Buddhism, it was almost a little bit too detached for me. I saw the value in it, and it absolutely changed my life. However, I wanted to get into my most primitive self. And so that's what kind of led me back to paganism, which eventually led me back to witchcraft, because I wanted that raw, primitive self, and I kind of like my ego. I really do. I like who I've become. And so there's definitely a little bit of a struggle there. However, with too much attachment, that's where you start suffering again. And I did notice that. So I found it's actually kind of nice to implement some of the Buddhist teachings into your witchcraft or pagan practice. And I see nothing wrong with that. I actually think it's really complementary, because you can want something as a human being. You can deeply desire something and also acknowledge that this may potentially be the root of some suffering, and I'm willing to make that sacrifice. And also, when you get to this certain point of desiring things too much in excess, you can take a step back and detach yourself, because you know that that is going to be the root of your suffering. So for me, it's kind of like a checks and balances system. I do have times where I really immerse myself into witchcraft and paganism ideals, and then there are moments where I take a step back and I immerse myself back into Buddhist teachings and Buddhist ideals. And I think it's healthy to kind of bounce back and forth between both, because I think that you can also lose yourself in both, just depending on who you are as a human being. So I like practicing more detachment and trying to achieve enlightenment, although there are monks that meditate every single day and that's pretty much all they do, and they still don't reach enlightenment. So I think it would be incredibly difficult for me to ever reach enlightenment, but it's a nice thing to strive towards. So yeah, I think that when you're getting to that point where you're wanting things too much, and also speaking of which, I think Buddhism can really help, because when you cast a spell, let's say you're a witch, you're casting spells, there is a certain level of detachment that you have to have after you cast the spell. You need to almost like set it and forget it, not obsess over it, and let the universe manifest that for you. And that's one of the hardest parts that I see for a lot of people in the witchcraft community, is when you cast a spell, how do you just trust that it's gonna happen? How do you not obsess over this? I actually talked about this with one of my channel members. It's really hard to not lust for results when you've casted a spell. And so that's where I feel like these Buddhist teachings can really come in and help you detach a little bit after you've cast the spell and trust a little bit more. I hope that that makes sense. I don't even know if anything that I said just makes sense, but that's kind of how I see it. I think both are complementary to each other. Brandon asks, what's the scariest occult thing you've ever come across in your life? It could be a family story, nasty spell work that you or another has done, bad encounters with spirits, etc. I have one story in particular that immediately came to mind that was the scariest thing. And I hesitate to tell this story because there's so much fear mongering in the community of working with spirits. And I work with spirits quite a bit, and I don't want to make anyone feel fearful of working with spirits. However, I did have a terrible interaction with a spirit at one point in my life. And this was kind of in the beginning of my journey starting to work with spirits. So my partner and I had moved into this house. We were renting this house, and we were renting it with two other people. The two other people lived upstairs and we lived downstairs. We had the whole downstairs floor. And something just kind of felt off about that space, but I couldn't really place it. And then odd things really started happening when my partner was away and it was just me in the house. I would be taking a nap. I remember explicitly taking a nap during the day because I like naps, okay? And then when I woke up, there were books pulled out of the bookshelf facing face down on the floor. And we didn't really have any animals. I have my dog, but my dog's in the bedroom with me sleeping. Like, my dog's not doing anything. And also, a dog can't really pull out specific books and lay them out on the floor. So it was really odd placement. No one was home except for me. And so I come out and I look at the books and I'm like, what the hell? And I put the books back. That continued to happen where books and things would fall off the shelves. There were so many different occurrences where things would start falling off shelves for absolutely no reason. And it was just really weird. And then one night I was in the bedroom taking another nap. Okay, I really like naps. Anyways, I was taking a nap and my partner was playing video games out in the living room. And between us, there was this little kitchenette, and the kitchenette had a bunch of shelving with like our plates and cups and things like that on it. And all of a sudden we both heard this giant crash to the ground. It got to the point where things were kind of starting to tip off the shelves, but all of a sudden the whole shelving detached from the wall and came crashing down on the ground. Our plates broke, our glasses broke. So I had basically been ignoring this spirit up until this point, and I think that that was really the downfall. I think the spirit was trying to get my attention, and it got really upset and didn't know how to communicate communicate with me other than starting to do larger and larger things until it finally got my attention. So at the time, it seemed really scary because all of a sudden shit was just flying off the shelves and now all of our plates are ruined. But really what I ended up finding afterwards, which I'll explain in a moment, that spirit just really, really needed my assistance and it couldn't communicate with me any other way. I wasn't paying attention when it was pulling books out of the bookshelf. I wasn't paying attention when it was knocking cups off shelves. And so what I did is I sat down with my tarot deck and I said, okay, it's time, spirit, let's have a conversation. And so I brought them into the space. I brought a little offering just as a peace offering. I don't even remember what it was at this time because this was like years ago. Anyways, I sat down with my tarot deck and started asking questions. And I said, spirit, guide my hand. What is it that you want me to know? And so I would hover my hand over the cards, and then there were certain cards that felt like a tap tap. And I knew that that was the card that the spirit wanted me to pick. So that's kind of how I started developing the way that I communicate with spirits. It's either like a warm buzzing sensation or like a tapping sensation. It depends on the spirit. Every spirit's a little bit different in my experience. But I would have this conversation with the tarot cards, and I made sure nobody was home because I did not want any interference from anyone else. So I sat down with the spirit, and what I found, I can't remember the entire conversation, but it was something along the lines of, it wanted to be acknowledged. It wanted me to know that this was their space. And it's okay that I live there, but we also need to pay respects to the spirit because this is their space. And so once there was some sort of like respect established for this spirit and us asking if we can stay in this space and just acknowledging that this is the spirit space, it got so much better after that point. I left regular offerings out for the spirit. So anytime we'd bake some cookies or cupcakes or something, I would leave a little extra out for the spirit, and nothing bad happened after that point. It was totally easy to coexist with the spirit. Sometimes we would hear little random things and it was kind of weird, but I would just leave little offerings out, and there were no more books coming out of the bookshelf. Nothing was flying off of the shelves anymore. And I think that that's why there's so much fear in the occult community when it comes to working with spirits, because spirits are so misunderstood that they get to a point where they're frustrated, in my experience, and they don't know how to communicate. So they do this big grandiose thing of knocking the entire shelves down, but then we're freaked out because we're like, what just happened? That is terrifying. I'm really scared. But the spirit's like, hello, I'm just trying to get your attention. So it all actually worked out in the end. And so if anybody's listening to this that has a similar situation, it may not be as scary as you think it is. It's probably just the spirit trying to get your attention, and they're desperate and they don't know how else to communicate. JR asks, what does your weekly practice look like? My weekly practice totally varies. I am a very chaotic and creative person, and I really like to change it up every single week. So I don't really have a routine. I definitely don't have a daily practice. So it just kind of varies. And I'm also a very obsessive person. So like when I get into something, I am into it 1000%. I am deep down that rabbit hole. So for 3 weeks at a time, I'll obsess over one particular facet of the occult world, and then I'll switch it over. And then the next 3 weeks or something, I will be completely down a whole nother rabbit hole. And whatever I'm currently studying really dictates how my weekly practice is looking like in that moment. So I don't know if I can really answer that because it's constantly changing. But I would probably say the one thing that is most consistent in my occult practice is tarot and planetary magic. Those are the two things. So on a weekly basis, I'm always kind of looking at the planets. I'm looking at the transits and seeing what's happening, what's moving where, what kind of energies we're working with. So that's something that's always kind of in the back of my mind. It's also great for spell work because I can look at the week ahead or the month ahead and go, ooh, that would be a really great day for a money working, or that would be a really great day to enhance my relationship or something like that. So that's always kind of in the back of my mind as part of my regular practice. And then I just kind of do tarot whenever I feel like I need to do tarot. I don't do it every day and I don't do it every week. So don't know if that's really helpful, but that's kind of what it looks like. A. Macon asks, how has the craft improved your life, and what spell or magic has helped the most, meaning protection or health, abundance, etc.? So I talked about this in my previous Q&As just a little bit, and then I've definitely talked about it in a couple of my videos, but I used to be severely depressed. severely for 30 years of my life. I never remembered a day where I wasn't depressed, and magic was the one thing that really helped me get out of that depressive slump. So that was definitely the most life-changing thing for me. But if anybody's interested in hearing more about that, I did talk about that a lot in my 5K Q&A, so I'm not going to talk about that a ton in this one. But I mean, it's hard to say because there's so many different ways that this has changed my life. I mean, money bowls are amazing in bringing in money. If you really, those are my favorite money spells, is doing a money bowl. That has definitely been an instrumental thing in my life as far as finances are concerned. And as far as protection goes, I mean, I do so much stuff for protection magic. So I don't even, like, when I did my protection magic video, I think that video is like 40 minutes long because it talks about all the different things that I'm doing in my magical practice. So that has definitely been helpful, just protecting me, protecting my home, protecting my loved ones. But I would say just the biggest thing has been helping with my mental health stuff, my depression, and completely curing that. I mean, yeah, there are moments where I'm still sad. That's not the same as being depressed. I think people have this notion, I'm not even gonna go down that rabbit hole. Yes, I do have sad days, but it's not like being clinically depressed. That's very, very different. So the fact that I was able to cure my own depression after years of treatment and therapy that didn't help me, that's kind of a miracle in my opinion. And also doing healing spells on other people and being able to heal people and to see other people's journeys blossom because of the small little impact that I may have had on their life. So the benefits are just endless. The Bridge Walker asks, my two questions are: one, if you only had one tool in working your craft, what would it be and why? And two, what is one spell or ritual that you've come back to again and again, even if you change it up as needed? So number two, I can answer right off the bat, money bowls. I've mentioned that so many times. That is the one spell. Like, if you want money, do a money bowl. If you don't have a money bowl, what are you doing? Do it right now. Do it today after you watch this video. Money bowls are amazing. It's the most efficient, quick magic I think I've ever done. That and sigils. Sigils for me, that is a technique that's just tried and true. I go back to it time and time again. It's easy, it's efficient, it's fast. I love making sigils for pretty much anything I want. So those are the two things for sure that I go back to again and again in my practice. And then if I only had one tool, it would probably be my cauldron. I mean, we're talking besides my mind, right? Besides my mind and besides my books. Like, we're putting those out. I would probably say my cauldron, because I'm kind of a pyro and I love burning literally everything. Anyways, that's what I would choose. The next category is deity work. So Becca asks, when you switch between pantheons for your chaos magic, since you keep what works and leave what doesn't, do you keep the relationship with the deity as well? I realize watching your videos, I've been practicing a form of chaos magic for a while, and I know it depends for me, but I was wondering about it for you. I almost put this one in the chaos magic section, but I think because we're just talking about deities, I put it in here. So I do keep some of the techniques and some of the relationships. I actually have some deity work videos that I really want to do this year. I already have them mapped out and everything, so I'll talk about those more in the videos, of course. But I have a relationship with Medusa right now that's actually kind of coming to a close. She's saying goodbye to me. The conversations just aren't flowing like they used to, and it's not because she doesn't want to work with me anymore. It's because I don't need her anymore. And so I do have one deity, Medusa, that's coming to a close, and I have a new god that just presented itself to me, and I'm going to do a video on that as well. And so I do kind of still keep those relationships with those deities, because at some point in my life I may want to go back to that deity and kind of revisit all the lessons that I have learned with that deity, because nobody's perfect, and over time I might have to kind of renew myself in that category, I suppose. But I do keep the techniques as well. So I love working with tarot when it comes to deities. I've found that it's super effective in communicating with them. So that is one thing that kind of, no matter what deity I'm working with, I'm always communicating to them through tarot. Although there have been some exceptions with certain magical entities, not necessarily deities, where I've switched to runes. It depends on the deity, because some are a little bit more primitive in my experience than others. And so with more primitive magical entities or deities, I might switch to runes. the conversation just flows differently and it feels nicer. And I know a lot of practitioners that choose their tarot deck based on the deity. So they may not even use the same tarot deck for every single deity that they've been working with. If they may have one deity dedicated to one tarot deck and another deity dedicated to a different tarot deck. So I definitely have a little bit of that. I do have my favorite decks that I just always work with, but yeah, I would say the techniques itself stay the same, but obviously the relationships and the lessons that I'm learning throughout it are totally different. I'm hoping that answers your question. I'm also trying to go through these questions quicker because I am taking way too long. So Wild and Witchy asks, what does deity worship look like? Everyone talks about working with deities, but they never say how to do it. So this is a question. This is something that I really want to do as soon as possible. Oh, I have so many videos that I want to get to and so little time, but this is something that I could probably spend a good 30 minutes talking about, because deity worship is going to look so different depending on the practitioner and depending on the deity that you're working with. And there's many different ways that you can do it. Some people like to just pray to their god, and that's all they do. They pray to their god for protection. Some people like to light a candle and have a conversation with the deity. What I would say in this video, just to be really quick and concise, is get a candle that you can dedicate to a deity. Try to pick their favorite color. Try to find out what herbs correspond to them, or maybe what oils correspond to them, and then dress this candle with those herbs and oils. You can even carve into the candle their name if you want to, or something that's related to them, and craft this candle specifically for working with this deity. And every time that you want to work with this deity, you light the candle and then proceed with your ritual. And the ritual can look like you just sitting there talking to your deity. It can look like you sitting there doing tarot. A lot of people like to do pendulum work with deities because it's a little bit more clear cut. You can ask yes or no answers, and it's a lot easier to interpret than with tarot. Tarot is like a more in-depth conversation. You can just sit there and meditate and see if any messages come through for you. So the ritual itself can just look so different, but get a candle to where you can light it only when you want to be working with that deity, and then snuff it out when you're done and put it in a special place. And a lot of people like to create altars for their deity. So they'll have their deity candle on the altar, and then they surround it with a bunch of stuff that corresponds to the deity. So if this deity is from the ocean, you would have lots of like seashells and hagstones and things like that on the altar, and you just kind of want to dedicate a space specifically for them. That way when you're ready to talk with them or work on your relationship, you have a dedicated space that you can go to do that. So yeah, that is a very, very quick answer, but it's so different. And I think that that's why there aren't very many in-depth videos on it, because it can totally depend, just depending again on the practitioner and on the deity. Next question comes from Ankitha. I apologize if I'm mispronouncing these usernames. So my question would be, how would you know that the relationship is two-way in deity work and not one-sided only? So I would say if you really want to get some confirmation that it's a two-way relationship and that it's not just one-sided, look at signs in the mundane world. So let's say you're working with a god or goddess that's related to crows or related to coyotes or whatever they correspond to. See if those images naturally pop up in your life repeatedly. And I'm talking about really odd sightings. Like let's say you live in a place where there are no crows, or maybe only a couple, and then all of a sudden you have a flock of crows now at your house every day for a week or something along those lines. But it doesn't have to be an actual crow. It can be crows popping up on your TV screen. All of a sudden you're seeing images of crows everywhere. You're overhearing people talk about crows. So it doesn't have to be the actual bird. It can just be that crow archetype showing up for you over and over again if that deity is related to crows. So definitely look at your mundane world, see if you can find some signs that relate to whatever the deity corresponds to. But I also wanted to put out there that even if it is one-sided, who cares? If it's working for you, then that's an absolutely valid way to practice deity worship. Sometimes with deity worship, some people go months and months without any communication from their deity, and it feels like silence. But really, there's nothing wrong with continuing that relationship with that deity, as long as it's still helpful for you, as long as you're still benefiting from it, as long as you're still learning lessons. And sometimes deities do go silent because they want you to learn a specific lesson. And then once you've listened to that lesson, you've learned, you've grown, outgrown, then they come in with a new thing that they want you to work on. So again, depends on the deity, of course, but if you're really looking for that confirmation, definitely look to the mundane world. Dreams would be another thing that I want to insert here really quickly. If you're having lots of dreams about this god or goddess and they're giving you messages in those dreams, I would consider that as confirmation that it's a two-way relationship. I don't know if everybody would, because everyone's perspective is different, but I personally would say that's a really, really good sign if you're having dreams about them. Hillary asks, my question is related to working with deities. I don't know where to start. I've researched a lot of them and I just don't feel a connection to any of them, but I'm really drawn to start working with them. I think my research may actually have overwhelmed me and now I don't know what to do next. Hillary, you sound exactly like me, because that is the exact same situation. I wanted to work with a deity so bad, but nobody resonated with me. Nothing called out to me. And then I did so much research to the point where I just kind of felt overwhelmed and there was just nothing screaming at me. So what I would say is that it's very similar to getting into an intimate relationship with somebody. Let's say you're looking for a girlfriend or something and you really, really want to be in a relationship with a girlfriend. However, you don't just want to pick anybody just because you want to be in a relationship with a girlfriend. You really want to wait for the right person to come along. And so the most frustrating piece of advice that I have for you is just to wait and don't obsess over it and let it happen naturally. There will be a deity that shows up to you organically when the time is right. And it's really frustrating when people always give that relationship advice of, oh, it happens when you least expect it. That's so annoying. That's so annoying to hear from people. But with deity work, I've found that to be personally true. It happens when you least expect it. It happens when you most need it. And so try not to obsess over not having that relationship now, even though I know that can be incredibly difficult to do, and just let it happen organically. Somebody will approach you at some point. But yeah, don't try to force a relationship just because you want that relationship, because again, it would be the same as picking someone who's not right for you and then forcing an intimate relationship with them. It's probably not going to end well. So you can try if you want, but my recommendation is just to wait and let something come up. Now we are getting into the section of chaos magic, my favorite, obviously. Reverend Phil's School of Magic asks, I know you have done other videos, so you may not answer this, but can you explain chaos magic again? So yes, I have all of my chaos magic videos pinned at the front of my YouTube channel, just right up at the top if you click on my channel. And I won't go too in depth in this video because one, this video is already way too long, and for two, chaos magic is very complicated and nuanced. And so for this question in particular, I think I'm just going to redirect everybody to my chaos magic videos. I definitely recommend watching the first video, What is Chaos Magic? And then the follow-up video, which is the second one that's pinned, is called Chaos Magic and the Avoidance of Dogmatism. Definitely recommend going into that. But it's basically a meta model of magic. It's a very psychological approach to magic that uses belief as a tool for manifestation. If we're really going to just dial it all the way back to the most simplistic terms, using belief as a tool for manifestation and also avoiding dogmatism of any kind and really rejecting anything as the one fundamental truth. And that is the one thing that gets the most confusing when trying to explain it to another person. So that's why I definitely recommend you watching that video on chaos magic and the avoidance of dogmatism. But when it comes to using belief as a tool, chaos magicians really believe that it's your belief in something that makes it real. So I've used this example before with deities, for example. Chaos magicians don't typically believe that deities are these external entities that are sitting above in the clouds looking down on us, but what we do believe is the belief in those deities is what makes them real. And so this gets really fun with chaos magic because you're using your own belief as a tool, and it really pushes you to decondition your mind, deconstruct everything that society has placed on your mind of how things should go and how things should be, and you can really get experimental with your practice, which leads me to the second question in this category. Mitchell asks, I'm curious your thoughts as a chaos magic practitioner about pop culture magic. Have you ever done it, or is it not really a method you're interested in? I think pop culture magic can be really fun. So this is where you get into stuff like using spells from Harry Potter in your magical practice, or using, I mean, but it can be literally anything. I'm just giving examples here. But yeah, I love bringing in pop culture into my magical practice. If there's a particular character that I deeply resonate with on a soul level, I will assume that archetype and bring them into ritual. There's actually one character in particular that I resonate with so deeply, and it's Yennefer from the Witcher series. I resonate so deeply with her pain and the amount of pain that she has inside that is able to give her this immense amount of power to work with. It's a really powerful archetype. So yeah, absolutely, I've brought Yennefer into my magical practice. I also really like using video games in this way. So I mentioned previously in this video that I play a lot of video games. Right now I'm really stuck on Skyrim, but I love fantasy open world RPGs. Like, that is my thing. That is all I play. That's all I do. And so I like taking inspiration from my video games and bringing that into my magical practice as well. So let's say, for example, there's a talisman that gives me 15 plus points in speechcraft, or there's like some boots that give me like 20 plus stamina or something like that. I'm going to take the inspiration from these video games and recreate those items in real life. And I'm almost treating my life like it's a video game, and I'm leveling up, and I've got all these different things that I can wear to increase my stamina, increase my power, and level up my character, so to speak. So it's kind of fun looking at your life like it's a video game. And for anybody else that also plays video games, there's typically some sort of like beast mode that you can get into where you're just like super powerful, right? So I like to think about beast mode and what that looks like in my daily life. What can I use to activate beast mode? How can I get there? What do my powers look like? And if you can get yourself to believe it, you can actually start manipulating your reality, which is the most incredible thing. It seems like all these silly little things, you know, like you're playing dress up or playing pretend, until you actually start getting real tangible results in the mundane world. And then you're like, holy shit, this is not a game. I actually really can manipulate my reality. I also use pop culture to inspire language that I use in rituals. So if there's particular spells in movies or TV shows that I just really like the language of that, I'm going to use it and I'm going to put it in my spell work. So it's really about taking all these diverse approaches and using what works. That's really what chaos magic comes down to, is doing what works and doing, it's the most efficient way, in my opinion, to practice magic, because there is no dogma. You're avoiding all the dogmatism and getting straight to the point of what actually works during ritual and what brings the best results. So it's very, very results based. And you can pair chaos magic with many other paradigms. You can be a chaos magician and a witch. You can be a chaos magician and a psychic, or a Norse pagan, or whatever. It's just a way of looking at magic and operating from a very psychological standpoint. And I feel like chaos magic is almost brainwashing yourself while also simultaneously unbrainwashing yourself, if that makes sense. You're deconditioning your mind from all these preconceived notions that society has placed there, but then you're also brainwashing yourself to believe that this spell from Harry Potter can be real. And so, but you're constantly deconditioning and brainwashing at the same time. Maybe that's my own personal experience, but it's so weird. It's kind of like a mind bender. So anyways, love chaos magic, obviously. All right, let's get into a little bit of ceremonial magic. So Queen6 says, by the way, that is a fabulous username. You mentioned that you started as a ceremonial magician and still incorporate ceremonial magic in your practice. Number one, what are some of the ceremonial rituals you practice, and how has this experience been for you? Okay, so there's actually a bunch of questions in this, and let me start with the first one first, because the second one gets a little bit more complicated. So as far as ceremonial rituals go now, I really participate in a lot of planetary magic, which can get pretty ceremonial. I am constantly looking at planetary timings and, you know, different transits that I want to work with. I don't work with planetary spirits, by the way. I've never really been called to work with angels and demons ever. It's just not my thing. I think it can be really, really effective for some people. I've personally just never been drawn to the whole angel demon archetypes. But yeah, planetary magic is something that I'm really passionate about. It started as moon magic, and then it got a little deeper, and then I got deep into natal astrology for a couple years, and now I've kind of settled on planetary magic and working with the planets to get what I want with a specific ritual. But I would consider that ceremonial magic, because you're waiting for a specific specific time. You're kind of essentially waiting for the stars align in a way that you want. And I do add some ceremonial elements to my rituals as well. I'm casting sacred space in a specific way that I personally enjoy casting sacred space. I am centering, I'm grounding, I'm directing, I'm creating a circuit between the earth and my feet. I'm creating a circuit between the celestial realm and my crown. So there's a lot of energy work that's happening that I would also consider ceremonial magic, because it's very step by step. I do this, and then I do this, and then I do this. And these are not rituals that I do all the time. These are rituals that maybe I do a handful of times a year, because they take a lot of effort and a lot of time to plan beforehand, but the results are incredible. So I do still do a little bit of ceremonial magic. It's just modified. It's modified for what works for me personally. So the second question is, do you prefer Golden Dawn style rituals or Crowley versions? So with my conversation about Crowley earlier in this video, I don't particularly care for him. I've never really been interested in learning about his style. It's always been Golden Dawn for me. It's always been Golden Dawn styles. But even then, even when I was a ceremonial magician, let me just say, I was never a good ceremonial magician. Just because I practiced it doesn't mean that I was good at it, because at the end of the day, I was always a chaos magician in my heart, and I just didn't know it. And so I was still modifying things and still doing things that worked better for me, rather than doing it exactly by the book. So I would say I was definitely more towards the Golden Dawn style of doing things, but I was still modifying it like a chaos magician would. So I just want to throw that out there, that just because I did that in my past doesn't mean that I was the greatest at it. And the third question is the most complicated one, and I'm really excited to talk about this. So number 3. Also, what is your opinion on the true purpose of LBRP, which is the lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram, as there seems to be a disagreement between those who think that is primarily a banishing ritual, as the name suggests, and those who think that is more of a energy equalizing practice, which was meant for the outer circle of the Golden Dawn. And finally, number 4, this question kind of ties into it a little bit. Do you think that just performing the LBRP and the LBRH in conjunction alone is really not sufficient for a full-on banishing like a lot of magicians believe? For instance, if you want to do a banishing on a house that's haunted, let's say, if these so-called banishing rituals that are supposed to clear any elemental planetary energies are not effective for certain banishings, I really don't understand what's the point. Apologies for my frustration. I understand some of my questions are more technical in nature than what you might like to answer in your Q&A video. Still, I would love to hear your thoughts and hear more in general on how you incorporate ceremonial magic in your practice. Okay, so they're basically asking, what is the LBRP and what is the point? And why do some people say that you can't use it for an actual banishing of, like, say, a whole house? Let's say you have a haunted house, there's a spirit in there. Why can't you use the LBRP? Or why do some people say that that's not an effective form of banishing a spirit from your home? It literally has a banishing word in the title. It's the lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram. And so I think the name of the LBRP is really misleading, and a lot of people think that it's a banishing ritual that gets rid of any magical entities or any spirits in the space, and that's not necessarily true. So the LBRP is meant to be a banishing ritual that banishes all of your personal demons, so to speak. This is the best way for me to be able to explain this, but there's this idea in ceremonial magic that you need to be in a state of purity before you go into the ritual. You basically want to get yourself as pure as you possibly can be before you do your ritual, and then you also want to do the same thing at the end of the ritual to just get rid of any residual whatever from the ritual. So a lot of people will do the LBRP multiple times a day. They'll do it sometimes first thing in the morning, first thing at night. Some people like to do the invoking ritual in the morning and then the banishing ritual at night. It just depends on your tradition and what you prefer. But these LBRPs or LARPs or LBRHs are just different ways of invoking energy and banishing energy, but it all pertains to you and this vessel. And so that's where I think that a lot of people really get tripped up, because I personally would not use an LBRP to get rid of some sort of spirit in a haunted house. And so to your question of what's the point? What is the point of this LBRP if I can't use it to get rid of spirits in my space, in this haunted house or whatever? The point is to achieve that state of purity and to banish your own personal demons, to make your ritual a lot more effective and to help you do that high magic and reach whoever it is that you're wanting to speak to during your ritual a lot easier. And to that, I will say, If you are going to go the ceremonial magic route, definitely start with the LBRP. I feel like that's where a lot of beginners start. They learn that and then you just do it multiple times a day until you've got the hang of it. And it really does help, in my experience, in these longer ceremonial magic rituals. It really does make a difference when you're putting in that time beforehand to come in your most pure state. However, just because you're banishing your personal demons and trying to reach this point of purity before your ritual does not mean that it's effective for banishing an entire house of all the potentially haunted spirits that may be living there. In that case, there are other banishing rituals that I would recommend, and you can create a whole grid on your living room floor. You chant certain things, you walk around in certain ways. There's so many different ways that you can do banishings like that. There's one book in particular for anybody that's watching this video that is interested on banishing rituals of like clearing things out of your space completely that's not LBRP. I really like Jason Miller's book. It's called Protection and Reversal Magic, a Witch's Defense Manual. So I definitely recommend looking into that book for anything like that if you're interested in going down that route. But yeah, again, I think the name is really, really misleading. People just assume that it's a banishing ritual that will get rid of literally anything in the space, and that's not necessarily true. I don't do anything like that anymore. I don't do the LBRP anymore. I don't do invoking rituals. I do a form of it, but I'm so deep down the rabbit hole with chaos magic that it doesn't even remotely look like what it used to look like. So yeah. Now we are to the miscellaneous category. So this is just gonna get all over the place. So Power Pops asks, my question is, what do you think about the merging of science and magic? I have been urged to study the similarities between Hermetic principles and quantum physics. I have already noticed several similarities, and I'm just wondering if you have. Yes, absolutely. Okay, so so for anybody who's not familiar, I'm double majoring, and one of my majors is psychology, like I talked about earlier in this video. My other major is molecular biosciences, and I am really, really interested more specifically in neuroplasticity and where our biology meets our psychology. And so for me, I have an obsession with the merging of science and magic and spirituality and all of those things. I actually think that they're sisters and they're really not that far apart as everyone seems to think. So science is a broad category too. I mean, you have quantum physics in there, but you also have psychology. Psychology could be considered a science as well. To me, it's a little bit more like a science and an art, but that doesn't matter. So as far as quantum physics go, yes, I agree. Everything that I've read on quantum physics, it seems to be right in correlation to the Hermetic principles. I have noticed that. I'm not good at physics. Physics is the one thing that I suck at. When I try to read books about it, I agree with it and I'm like, oh yeah, I could totally see the correlation here. Can I explain it to anybody else? Nope, because that is so far over my head. So I can't speak to the quantum mechanics side of things, but I can speak to the psychology side of things and being able to manipulate your reality. And not just manipulating your reality, but manipulating your biology as well, which then changes your reality even more and your experiences. So yeah, I have an interest of going into neuroplasticity and epigenetics, and it's just fascinating. And there's so much that I could say about this. Like, for example, there are so many experiments that I want to do in a lab setting when the time comes, and I don't know if I want to share them on this video because I want credit for them when the time comes, but I do have some theories swirling around in my mind that I really don't want to share with anybody yet because I think I know how I want to go about testing this, but I don't want to share it with anybody else until then. So let me just say, yes, I agree with you. However, I don't want to share my thoughts and ideas yet because I plan to test it out and I don't want somebody to take credit for my ideas. So maybe that's selfish, I don't know, but I've got some theories in the back of my mind. Jessie asks, what do you think of using physical tech makers in the craft, like 3D printers, craft cutters, possibly even robotics? And I had responded, this is awesome. What a great question. I know absolutely nothing about robotics, but I use technology quite a bit in my craft. I mean, I had just talked about how I use video games and how I bring that into my chaos magic practice. I also see people, so I've talked about this world building concept quite a bit in my videos before, so I won't, deep dive into this, but it's essentially creating this inner temple inside your mind, and each room or each area of that inner temple has a different theme and you can use it in spell work. And so feel free to check out, I've got a video, it's Let's Talk Spellcraft witchcraft, let's talk spell work, and then the main theme is world building and audio sigils, and I think I talked about a third thing in that video. I can't really remember. Mudras, that's what I talked about. But I talked about world building quite a bit in that video, and I see the potential of people using technology to create this as well, especially if you're a person that can't visualize at all. You can use technology to create that world inside of your mind, but create it, like, let's say you're in coding. I'm taking a coding class right now, so this is really inspiring me, but you could create this whole video game or this whole, I don't know, some sort of world in your laptop with all these different visuals to replicate what you want to happen inside your mind. And so this is really great for people that can't visualize, because then you can actually see it on your computer and you can build these worlds and then use it during spell work. You can go into that specific room and pull it up on your screen and have it in front of you while you're casting that spell. And then somebody else responded to that comment and said, I've toyed with the idea of 3D printing and touching up some statues for my altar, but haven't gotten around to it yet. I have also considered using my cry cut to make vinyl sigils, specifically for my card dashboard. So yeah, I think there are so many different opportunities to use technology in your magical practice. And I actually just watched a video yesterday from Angela's Symposium. I love Angela. She's got a PhD in occult studies, and so I definitely recommend checking her out, checking out her channel. But she just did a video on artificial intelligence in the occult community, or just using AI to potentially cast spells, and actually it was a really interesting video. So I'll link that video down in the description box so it's easier for you guys to find. But definitely, if you're interested in deep diving into more, you know, technology and the occult, definitely check out that video. But I think there's so many different opportunities to use technology in the craft. Fire Earth says, why do witches care so much about protection? I adhere to the psychological model when it comes to theories on why magic works. Do I need protection, and why? I think a lot of people care so much about protection. Well, there's a couple different reasons, and this is just my own personal opinion. For one, I think there's a lot of fear mongering in the occult community that really drives me insane. And so I think that there is this push for everyone to protect themselves all the time, because you're dealing with things that you don't understand, and there is that level of fear there. And so having some sort of protection magic set up around you can really be helpful in getting rid of that fear and easing your mind a little bit as you go into the magical spheres. And I think it's important when you are starting to work with stuff that you don't fully understand. I do think it's important to have protection up around you, not just for making yourself feel better, but also just in case you really don't know what could potentially happen. However, if you are adhering to more of a psychological approach to magic, I don't know if protection magic would be necessary for you unless you feel fearful, unless you feel like you need it. And I say that because I operated just from the psychological model for a really long time, and I was not really interested in protection magic at all, and I was totally fine. Now, even though I still practice from a psychological standpoint, I'm a little bit more open-minded to the possibilities of things out there that I don't fully understand. And I think that there's energies that I'm working with now in my practice after doing this for a while that I don't necessarily know if the psychological approach really explains everything that's happening to me anymore. And so for me, I really like to utilize some protection magic in my practice just to cover my bases. I don't think anything's gonna happen, but we also don't know the answer. So I'd like to be safe. And I think another reason why protection magic is so stressed, especially in the witchcraft community, is because it's the easiest spell for a beginner to cast. There's so many beginners coming into the witchcraft community right now, which is great, and they're concerned about, well, I want to cast a spell, but I don't know how, I don't want it to backfire. And protection magic spells, they really can't backfire. I mean, the only thing that can happen if your protection magic spell doesn't work, it's just not gonna work. You know, I've never really heard of a protection magic working, backfiring and giving some really terrible results or something like that. So I think it's also the safest form of magic to practice, which is really appealing to beginners. So I think that's another reason why protection magic is so stressed, especially to beginners, because they can essentially practice their magic by doing protection, and it's not really going to harm them because it's very, very low risk. So I don't think you need it if you're adhering to the psychological model, but it's nice to have. Pagan Crafting asks, I just watched one of your videos from 3 months ago and you mentioned ley lines. I'm versed in what the ancients used them for. I've collected some water from a major ley line interception that is only 5 hours from my home. I know what I can use the water for and collect some every few years when I visit, but as a witch, witch, what else can I do? I enjoy the feeling of the energy when I'm there. It is a Native American sacred place, but other than the pyramids, I'm not sure how I can put it into my practice, and I'd really like to incorporate it within my magical practice. I'm so drawn to this intercession ley line. I'd love to hear what you know. I think ley lines probably deserves to have its own separate video because there's also astrocartography that can go in this section as well, which is kind of separate from ley lines, but I find that there are some magical practitioners that really like to combine the energy of ley lines with astrocartography. And astrocartography is basically locational astrology. You look at your birth chart. It's so beyond the scope of what I can talk about in this video, and I'm certainly no expert on it, but there are certain areas that are said to be more prosperous for you in certain categories of your life, just depending on your birth chart. Some people say you need to move to this area of the world and you'll have better luck with your finances, or this area of the world and you'll feel like you have more purpose in your career, you know, just depending on what your natal chart looks like, and everyone's grid looks a little bit different, but that can kind of fall into ley lines as well, just looking at where the ley lines fall while you're using your birth chart to really analyze how you can personally use that energy in your magical practice. But I would just say in general, to keep it super easy, ley lines, it's just a superpower energy. It's almost like, to me at least, this is my own personal opinion, but it's just like a magical battery. It's just a ton of extra energy that can connect you to spirit or the divine or any particular deity, whomever it is that you work with. And so I feel like you could really use that in just anything, any magical working that you could possibly imagine. You have this extra energy that's really helping to power your spell, because I'm always talking about how when you start to do bigger spells and rituals, you really want to start looking to other sources of energy that you can bring into your spell work to help power that spell. Because usually, I mean, if you're going to do a really big spell, that's way too much for you to power on your own. If you can do it, you're going to be extremely depleted and not feel very good afterwards. So I would imagine that using something that comes from a ley line or doing a ritual on that ley line, you could do a much larger ritual for a lot less energy expenditure on your end. And that's so versatile. You can really use it anywhere. But again, I think ley lines definitely needs to be its own video topic for sure. This next question is from Nocturnia. My question is if you think that there is an objective morality out there. Some say we can find it in the universe's pool of knowledge, truth, etc. If yes, can we identify it with our subjective mind, and can we be sure of it somehow? In my mind, it's like we are all wearing tinted glasses, our own subjectivity, so when we see the same flower, we perceive its colors slightly different, if that makes sense. Is there a way to be sure? And I just kind of wanted to clarify the question a little bit further. So I asked, is your question essentially asking if there is an objective truth? And if there is an objective truth, how do we decipher that from our subjective experience? I personally don't think a single person has the right answer to this question. So I'm going to give my own perspective on it. But honestly, I don't think that there is any sort of objective truth. And if there is some sort of objective truth, we are so far from being able to understand what that looks like. I don't think our tiny pea brains are meant to know the answer. And so to claim that there is some objective truth really goes against me as a chaos magician wanting to avoid any sort of dogmatism, because I innately reject anybody or anything that says that there is one fundamental truth. Because I agree with you. I think that we are all wearing these tinted glasses and looking at everything a little bit differently. And so in my mind, I also believe in multiple timelines and multiple dimensions. And so my version of this reality is very real to me, but it could be drastically different than someone else's version of reality, which is also just as valid, because in their dimension, that is a very valid experience. And so it's kind of this idea of all religions are true, and yet none of them are technically true, because if all of them are true, then that negates the other religions that are also true, therefore making their one fundamental truth invalid. So I don't think that anybody has the answer to this, and if they do, I would slowly back away. Personally, because I just don't think that we're meant to know the answer. I think it's just way too complicated with multiple dimensions of existence. However, I can acknowledge that our own subjectivity really does play into the reality that we create. And this is something that I could absolutely talk about forever. This is something I've really thought deeply about for a long time. So it's a great question. And the last question in this category is from Adriana. Do you think that the psychological point of view is compatible with an animist point point of view? And also, how does it feel to work with a spirit of any sort, deity, Goetia, angels? Is it only mental, or do you feel something in the body? Is it only imagination? So this is something also that I have really thought about for a long time, because for a while I only operated from the psychological model, and I still do operate from a psychological model of magic. However, as I mentioned previously in this video, I am much more open-minded to the possibility of other things being out there that I don't really fully understand, that may be beyond my dimension of thought. I also believe that our minds are portals. So even if I am practicing from a psychological perspective, that doesn't necessarily mean that I believe it's all in our heads. In fact, I think that our minds are portals to other dimensions of thought, to other timelines, to other entities and spirits, etc. So yes, it kind of is all in our mind, but not necessarily in the way that everyone thinks. I don't think it's just imagination. I think there's something a little bit more to that, but also imagination does create reality too. So imagination in itself is more than people think it is. So anyways, back to the original question. Do you think that the psychological point of view is compatible with an animist point of view? So for anybody that is watching this that's not familiar, animism is this idea that everything has some sort of spirit or energy attached to it. You, me, dogs and cats, rocks, trees outside, everything has some sort of this spiritual essence to it. And for me, spirit and energy is kind of synonymous. I know that's not the case for everybody, but I really view spirit and energy as the same. So I kind of use those terms interchangeably, but just know that not everybody will. I think innately, these two models really contradict each other, because if you're operating from a hard psychological approach where you really believe it's all in your head, it's your belief that there is nothing else beyond that, it's kind of similar, how do I explain this? It's kind of similar to hard polytheism versus soft polytheism, if you know what I'm talking about. If you are hardcore psychological point of view and you are not open to anything else beyond that, then I think that does contradict the animist point of view. However, if you are a soft psychological person, if you take a soft approach to the psychological model of magic, which is what I do, it's very soft. Yes, I operate from that standpoint, but I can also acknowledge this energy or essence or spirit in everything else around me as well. So I think that depends on your own personal perspective, because I do personally work from an animist perspective as well, where there is energy and essence in everything around us. And so to answer the second question, how does it feel to work with a spirit of any sort, deity, Goetia, angels, etc.? Is it only mental? Do you feel something in the body, or is it only imagination? It's hard to answer this, because even if it is only in your imagination, you can still produce physical sensations and manipulate your reality just from your imagination. So even if it is all in your head, or even if it's only imagination, I can still produce those feelings in my body without being able to anticipate it. Our subconscious mind is incredible, and we don't understand it like at all. It is a beast, and that's why I personally feel like our subconscious mind is a portal to other dimensions of thought outside of ourselves. So for me personally, even though it is very, very mental, I'm still experiencing bodily sensations, and I'm still going through that portal in my mind that does get me to somewhere external. And so in that respect, I almost feel like it's not just imagination. It is something deeper than that. I don't think we have the right language to be able to discuss this yet, because when we talk about imagination, we just immediately think it's fake and that we're making it up. And maybe some of it we are, but it's producing real results, real tangible results in our reality. And at that point, I don't think it's imagination anymore. There's another word that we need to have for something like this, and I just don't know what that word is yet. And I feel like our language really falls short. But just talking about my own personal experiences, when I am working with a spirit, this is what really helped me get out from a hard psychological view to more of a soft psychological view, because my interactions with spirits have been so exciting and I can't explain it. It is physical sensations that I'm experiencing when a spirit taps me on the hand when I'm trying to read tarot cards for them. It is a sensation of warmth producing in certain areas of my body, or smells that I'm smelling that don't belong to me or the environment. It's very, very strange. So yeah, I think this is a really interesting question, and this is another one that I could probably talk about forever. Okay, that was all all the questions in the Q&A. Oh my goodness, that was such a fun conversation. Let me know your thoughts about any of these topics in the comments below. Thank you so much, channel members, for your continued support. If anybody is interested in supporting me a little bit further on this channel, you can always leave a tip. There's like a super thanks option down below, so you can always leave a tip on any of my videos or consider becoming a channel member and getting all the perks that come with that. But thank you all so much for watching this video. Let's do a tag word because it's been a while since we did a tag word. So I got this idea from Alvine Green, and I actually messaged her to make sure it was okay that I used her idea because I didn't want to do that without asking. But let's do a tag word for today. So if you have watched this video all the way up until this point, which I'm sure it was a very long video, I have not edited yet, but it's gonna be a long one for sure. But if you watch this video up until this point, type in black cat into the comments below. Let's do black cat because I'm feeling that energy today. I'm feeling like black cat. I really need to work with that today. And it's just really fun for me to see who's sticking around till the end and wasting all this time with me. So anyways, thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you have a blessed day, and I'll see you in another video soon. Bye.